Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This February 15th, 2022 meeting of the Lake Oswego City Council is now called to order. Ms. Linder, will you please start with the roll?
Mayor Buck?
Here.
Councilors Wendland?
Here.
Wynn?
Here.
Burdick? Here. Ruff?
Here.
Mans? Here. And Moot?
Here.
Thank you. And we will now start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand and remove your hats. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, now we're going to move into public comment. And to start, we have a presentation from Jay Hamachek and company. Please come on forward. I understand you
rearrange your furniture.
brought some multimedia presentation for our delight.
Movies for you.
And just for the record, of course, but just state your names, and we're glad to have you here.
Yeah, Jay Hamachek, 777 North Shore.
Dorothy Atwood, 16355 White Oaks Drive.
Lisa Adato, 1960 Egan Way.
Thank you all.
So I'm going to start off. We are here to represent the Lake Oswego Sustainability Network. Thank you very much for having us. And I'm going to go first, then Dorothy and Jay will do most of the presentation. But first I wanted to start and just say, I know you're all familiar with the Sustainability Network. And we really adopted for the first time in the last year, taking on a public stand on public policy issues. And it's new for us. But the reason that we did it is because it's occurring to us that this stuff is real. Even though we've worked on it for so long, we really want to focus now on actual emissions, actual toxics, and making a real impact. When we started, our objective was sort of to change the culture in Lake Oswego. And we had a lot of wonderful book clubs and events and discussions, and we had a story project. But that's all good, and we feel like Lake Oswegans really care about the environment now, and we've seen that in public surveys and in many ways. And now we want to really get to it. And that it took us back a little bit with this project because all we really want to do is be really nice. But sometimes we realize we might have to respectfully disagree or be obnoxious or push a little bit. So that is sort of the new LOSN, but we hope you do this in a spirit of partnership and friendship to take the objectives we care about so much and move them forward. So our objectives for the wastewater treatment plant, because it's such an immense and incredibly important plant, are to look at ways and to push for optimizing the environmental footprint of the plant. And we want, in doing so, to meet the express needs of our citizens, our fellow citizens here in Lake Oswego, especially the young ones, who are really asking that sustainability and climate change be priorities. We want to recognize that we're now in a new era. When I started working on climate change almost 20 years ago, and it was kind of abstract at that point, but now it's become very real. Hundreds of people have died with a heat wave. We see all kinds of impacts, and in Oregon and around the country with fires and many other things. And not only is it real today, but it is going to become more and more real over the future. So one of our themes today is going to be flexibility, because with this rapid onset of real environmental issues that are impacting people's lives and their businesses and their hopes for the future, we are going to see more rapid changes in technology and in laws. One example that really kind of shocked me, because I've been working on this for a long time, is the rapid change in people's attitude towards natural gas. 5 years ago, people were like, well, natural gas, it's better than coal. And now we have, probably in the Northwest, 50 cities and other communities saying, we're going to outlaw new natural gas. So anyway, because of those things, we're taking it real. We're making it real. And we want you to keep a sense of flexibility with this immense project as we go forward, because there will be continuous change in the decades to come. Thank you.
All right, I'm all about thanks. We've been working on this for over a year, and we still like working on it, mostly because we've had awesome collaboration with your city staff, particularly Anthony Hooper. He's been really, he's been open, he's been listened to our comments. It's clear from the staff report that they've thought about them. Just like we say we can respectfully disagree, he tells us when he thinks that the things that we're asking for might not be feasible, and we have a conversation about that. But we just keep wanting to make sure that this project is an amazing project. We've spoken to many of the wastewater treatment plant professionals in the area, Clean Water Services, Clackamas Water Environment Services, City of Gresham, Portland Bureau of Environmental Services, our partner in this particular project, and the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure. Everyone's very excited to see this Aqua Narita process and see what kind of efficiencies we can have. So we just want to say thank you to the staff. Thank you. We've met with SAB and representatives, and Amanda, your sustainability manager. And we don't feel like we're at loggerheads. We feel like we're pushing each other. We're having a really productive and constructive dialogue. Also want to say that just a quick thank you to all of you for your sustainability perspective, particularly in the support of the REACH Code, and Mayor Buck for your testimony in Salem. So on to Jay.
All right. Good afternoon, Mayor, Council, and staff. We have 4 recommendations. The first is to think big when it comes to solar at the new wastewater treatment plant and the Foothills development. The design already calls for solar panels on top of the new wastewater administration building, and the city design team is exploring with the Oregon Energy Trust additional solar panels on the top of the treatment building. LOSN is encouraging the city to maximize the solar resources, both of the treatment plant and the future Foothills development. Questions like, can we add solar over parking or nearby parks or residents or land vacated by the existing treatment plant should be asked. This is a new wastewater treatment technology. It's truly innovative, and it's going to be attracting a lot of outside interest and visitors to our city. And it's a great opportunity for Lake Oswego to demonstrate net zero future for the city and the region. Our second recommendation is to help future-proof the plant. At the very least, this plant's going to be with us for 30 years, hopefully 60. And by reserving 3 acres of the existing City of Portland wastewater treatment plant for future treatment options and other requirements. The existing Portland plant was built in 1965, expanded in 76, upgraded in 2003. Even with these modifications, it's now obsolete, and it would take a lot of capital to upgrade it to the current environmental standards. Reserving acreage gives the future city councils and the citizens optionality when it for treatment and other future clean water laws that we don't even know yet. So redevelopment of the Foothills area or future sustainability-driven projects such as on-site solids treatment, solar energy, or water reuse options are also gives us the flexibility for that in the future. The third recommendation was also part of your council's goal setting this last weekend. The new wastewater footprint and odor control features enhances the future Foothills development options. The Foothills area gives the city a unique and rare opportunity to build for our city's future with a much more sustainable medium to high density housing options for our citizens. The Foothill redevelopment and the new City of Lake Oswego wastewater treatment plant are separate projects that are deeply intertwined. Decisions such as recommendations to reserve the land of the old City of Portland treatment plant need to be made with a synergistic vision of the complete foothills future development and its separate, not as separate isolated projects. The last is, again, we compliment both the city staff at EPCOR. They've really brought an innovative treatment option for all of us to have a sustainable future. We strongly encourage the city team to remain open to the city's present and future challenges. The city has retained Carlo Engineering to conduct a third-party review of the new wastewater treatment plant. Issues that should be addressed by Carlo or an additional third party would be water reuse options, solar and other renewable options designed for the future regulatory issues such as treatment of pharmaceuticals or outfall temperatures, and also the EPCOR contract flexibility to look at treatment challenges and incorporating realistic performance metrics for the new plant and EPCOR. We thank all of you for your time and also the city staff for listening to us very kindly.
All right, thank you both so much. I think, Councilman, would you have a question? No, oh, accidental button hit. Okay, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your input in coming here today. Oh. Okay, tough act to follow, but Carol Lockhart, if anyone can do it, it is you. Please come forward. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Carol Lockhart, and I want to start by thanking Council for your oversight on HB 2001. I attended many of the DLCD meetings to create the State Middle Housing Code and then served on the Middle Housing Committee that this Council created. I'm currently the chair of the Neighborhood Chairs Committee, past chair of Fanforest Hills, and now their current land use liaison. I've participated in numerous land use pre-apps and land use projects over the last 15 years. For your work session today, you have a staff report that covers many important aspects of middle housing regulations and how within state guidelines they might be right-sized for Lake Oswego. There are 3 very key additions I encourage you to consider in today's work session. In order to allow cities to preserve neighborhood character, middle housing regulations do not require cities to site triplexes, quadplexes, townhomes, or cottage clusters on lots that are smaller than zone standard size. Cities can choose to allow triplexes, quadplexes, townhomes, or cottage clusters only on lots that meet minimum zone size. This is the right choice for maintaining neighborhood character and appropriately siting middle housing in our neighborhoods. Middle housing regulations also allow cities to set a minimum floor area for a unit in a cottage cluster below 900 square feet. Cities can set a minimum floor area standard for a cottage cluster unit, maintain middle housing standards for people living in middle housing. I encourage you to take advantage of that state-provided opportunity, and perhaps 500 square feet would be a good fit. Middle housing regulations also allow cities to set a maximum number of units in a cottage cluster at 8 or higher. Cities can set a maximum number of units in a cottage cluster, and setting that maximum at 8, as the state allows, would be a good fit for our predominantly built-out infill community. Staff and I have discussed and confirmed these specific options for cities, and though they did not appear in the staff report, no doubt staff will be covering them in their oral presentation. This work session is the opportunity to direct these key middle housing code options be incorporated into draft code language. I have a short handout for you that covers these 3 key items. I'll be here for the remainder of the work session, and if I can answer any questions or provide insight into how middle housing has been developing in first edition, then you can please call me back up to the table, and thank you again for the middle housing that this council has put into process.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate your input. Thank you for the flyers. Thank you. Okay, I don't have any others. So is there anyone else who wanted to provide public comment before we move on? Okay. Okay, thank you, everyone. So first on our study sessions today is the Middle Housing Code Amendments, House Bill 2001, Senate Bill 458. Eric Olson, Senior Planner, and Director Siegel.
Mayor Buck, and good afternoon, councilors. So we're here to talk about middle housing. We've been hard at work since the last time we met back in November to discuss our progress. So we're really here to report on what we've done in the time since then. So really, we're looking at the package of proposed code amendments to meet state middle housing requirements intended to accomplish City Council's goal to conserve the community's quality of life by planning for growth and change, and specifically the initiative to adopt codes that are compliant with House Bill 2001 that are consistent with the community's sense of place, neighborhood character, and livability. So really, again, we're here to summarize all of these different sort of components of the code amendments that we're recommending today, and looking for direction from council on what we're going to bring to the public hearing. So as I mentioned, we last spoke about this with City Council in November of 2021. At that point, we had summarized recommendations that were developed by the Middle Housing Code Advisory Committee. Council during that meeting directed the Planning Commission and staff to prepare development code amendments essentially to meet minimum compliance provisions, specifically recommendations that were developed by the committee that are required to be adopted by the state mandated deadline of June 30th, 2022. Council also directed us to prepare amendments that would comply with the expedited middle housing land division requirements of Senate Bill 458 at that meeting. So since then, we held a community forum in early December. This was a virtual community forum. Really, it was intended to provide information on the city's approach to middle housing and to allow for public input before going through and drafting these recommendations. So this included what we refer to as a story map and a survey as well on a website that was made available basically for the entire month of December throughout the end of 2021. And we received about 100 responses to that survey, and we summarized those in one of the attachments to the staff report that you received. Since then, we held 4 Planning Commission work sessions to discuss some of the recommendations for these proposed code amendments. The first one was really in December, talking about an initial package of basically required code amendments where the city has very little discretion. The second one in January, rather, we discussed design and dimensional standards for most middle housing. The one after that, we focused on design and dimensional standards for cottage clusters. And just yesterday, we held the 4th work session where we really talked more about development review processes for middle housing and how those will look under a system that complies with House Bill 2001. So behind the scenes, of course, at the same time, we're working to draft code that sort of complies with these requirements. Our intent is to release a public review draft on March 8th. There will be public hearings at the Planning Commission beginning in April, and public hearings at City Council beginning in May. So just to also mention, moving forward, we're also going to be planning a second community forum for the month of March. So that will be on March 22nd. And that will be just essentially an opportunity for the public to weigh in on what we're proposing, to take a look and learn about what we're proposing, provide some input prior to moving to the public hearing. So we're nearing the end of the process here, but there's more to come, and of course more sort of later in the year with House Bill 2003. So I don't want to tell you that we're getting close to the end because this will go on for a little bit. All right, so getting into the proposal itself and what we developed with the Planning Commission. Unfortunately, the font's got a little strange here, but this is just a real quick summary of what we're proposing for changes to the development code, where we're adding definitions for cottage or for middle housing types. So we're hoping to separate triplexes and quadplexes from multifamily developments. We're hoping to add a definition for cottage cluster, which doesn't already exist. And we would essentially also add a definition for townhouse project, which would be a little bit different than our current definition of townhouses. We also want to, we're basically going to be not revising the definition of courtyard, but adding a new cottage cluster courtyard definition to comply and make sure we're meeting those requirements. So as you might allow, in order to technically allow middle housing, we have to actually go in the code and say that it's permitted in numerous districts. So those include districts you see on the screen here, low, medium, and high density residential districts that allow detached single family today. So Division 46 does allow, and Division 46, when I use that term, I'm really referring to the state minimum requirements for middle housing. So those allow the city to really kind of prohibit or limit middle housing areas that are protected in, goal protected areas is the term that's used by the state under certain conditions. So we already have a lot of these regulations in place in our Greenway Management Overlay District, Sensitive Lands Overlay District, Flood Management Area, Hillside Protection Area, and Historic Preservation Areas. Generally, these all comply, and we can apply those to middle housing as is. The one change, though, that we would propose would be to amend the Sensitive Lands Overlay District essentially to treat duplexes in the same manner as single-family dwellings. So for the purposes of reconstruction or on lots that are encumbered entirely by sensitive lands currently, you're allowed to build a single-family residence as of right. But under House Bill 2001, that will have to be extended to duplexes, but not to other middle housing types. And generally, because we won't really have single-family zones anymore in the city, all the single-family zones will also allow other types of housing. We're going to eliminate references to single-family zones and try to make things more consistent. And so, kind of along with sort of allowing the uses in those zones, we'd have to go through and update our use standards to specifically permit those. So this kind of gives you an impression of where we're at now in terms of compliance with House Bill 2001. There are a lot of zones that we need to allow middle housing within, so we're going to be proposing to do that. When it comes to density, Division 46 does prohibit the city from applying maximum density standards to duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, and cottage clusters. So under that minimum compliance route, the city would really have to eliminate any provisions for maximum density other than for townhouses. So in townhouses, we are allowed, though, to limit the density to 4 times the minimum lot size of the zone, basically. So I think that's actually a bit inaccurate on the slide there. So it's really 4 times that's applied for single-family dwelling. So 4 times what would be allowed for single family.
Can you explain that just a little bit as an example? So you could put what on a lot?
So you can put single family residence, duplex, triplex, quadplex, townhouse with up to 4 units, or a cottage cluster development of we'll talk about that more, but it would be a minimum of 5 units for a cottage cluster development as long as it meets the minimum lot size.
And when you say 4 times the density, explain that so that if you had a house that took up 100 cubic feet, you're saying that you could now put something with 400 cubic feet?
No, so when we say density, we're talking about units per lot generally. So we're not talking about floor area. You're talking about the same, cubic feet that you'd be able to construct currently, but just sort of dividing that into 4, 3, or 2, or just leaving it as is. So really taking the existing envelope and being able to add density without expanding the existing building envelope.
Okay.
And again, this idea of minimum lot size is kind of more helpful, I think, in some ways than density. It's more of what we use practically in the planning department. And so generally, on a given lot that meets minimum lot size today, you can develop a single-family dwelling and an ADU, if you want to be technical, but that's the, single families get, 1 per lot. Under middle housing, it will be 4 dwelling units per lot for townhouses specifically. Does that answer your question, Councilwoman?
Thank you.
Yeah, follow-up question to Councilwoman's question. So just on that same topic, so does that mean that for an R, for example, for me, cubic feet, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So if say that a lot is zoned R5, R75, does that mean that now on an R5, instead of having 1 house on it, it can have 4 units on it?
So it could have 1 structure, but 4 units. Yes. So it wouldn't have 4 different structures that are detached. It would have one structure with 4 attached units that would be allowed on a R5. So if it was an R5 district, 5,000 square foot minimum lot size. Although actually that's a bad example because we're going to get into some exceptions to that rule in just a moment. So,
or maybe a better example would be an R10, so R10.
Yes, I think R10 would be the easier, but yes. So essentially, you can currently build single family with an ADU on a 10,000 square foot lot in R10. Under middle housing proposal, you'd be able to build up to 4 townhouse units on that lot.
And that would include garages?
Yeah, so density doesn't account for garages. That's a floor area standard. So we're talking about the number of dwelling units. So garages would be sort of separate from that calculation.
I have a quick question of clarification, and maybe you're going to talk about this in exceptions. My understanding, and I could be wrong on this, was that HOAs, for example, Mountain Park, where you have these large HOAs, will be excluded from this particular land use law. Is that correct?
So it's correct, but there are some technical sort of
Okay.
details that are important there. So,
I just want to, yeah, I'm sure you're going to get to that sort of thing.
well, you know, I generally speaking, when it comes to HOAs and, you know, covenants that might prevent the development of middle housing, the city doesn't have purview over those. So those can remain in place, but they wouldn't be, the city wouldn't say you're exempted from middle housing. You know, we'd still have to allow it in the case that the HOA or private covenant was modified to allow middle housing in the future. And, you know, there's all sorts of different sort of individual agreements on individual lots that, you know, are private agreements that the city doesn't have real purview over.
Okay, so the covenants then, in other words, whatever the covenant is on the deed, if it's an HOA or whatever other device, would stand, and the city has no purview over it.
That's correct, yeah. So
Got
there's
it.
kind of an additional overlay outside of the city,
Got
if
it,
you will.
okay,
yeah.
thank you.
Right, and I can move forward if that's all right.
Yes, yes, thank you.
So in terms of where middle housing will be allowed, we've talked about this concept of minimum lot area. And so really instead of density, because the state is going in saying you can't have a maximum density for many different middle housing types, minimum lot area becomes the proxy for density. So that is one way that we can control, you know, this density to a certain degree. So one thing that Carol actually touched on that we are going through and recommending is that we take this sort of large lot concept and apply it to middle housing. So we discussed some options back in the end of last year, both publicly and with the Planning Commission, for different concepts. So we could either sort of apply the same minimum lot size to single family as we apply to triplexes, quadplexes, and cottage clusters, or the state allows us to apply a larger minimum lot size for those types of housing. So under this concept, triplexes, even if it's an R5 zone that has a 5,000 square foot minimum lot size, for a triplex, there would be a 6,000 square foot minimum lot size. And for a quadplex and cottage cluster, there could be a 7,000 square foot minimum lot size. So this really only would impact the R3, RW, RDD, R5, and R6 districts, because anything over 7,000 square feet, R7, 5, R10, R15, these would all be allowed under the state requirements. So that's something that we were able to discuss again with the Planning Commission, think about what their preferences were, and we also posed this question in the survey that was distributed last year. And so this was the preference of all parties that we discussed this with.
And that's the minimum?
Yes, this is,
That's by state law. We couldn't go 12,000 for triplex and 15,000 for quadplex?
this is the absolute minimum.
Okay.
Eric,
The maximum minimum, if you will. Like that's a,
Right.
Yeah.
so currently in the R3, we permit triplexes and quadplexes, right?
We don't. We might allow for multifamily development, but it wouldn't be allowed in the same way as a middle housing type would today, so it would require a different process. So we could allow a multifamily structure of 3 units. We wouldn't call it a triplex, but it wouldn't be allowed as of right, if that makes sense. You'd have to go through a review process. Minor development, yeah.
Okay, so folks could still build units through a different process other than this one?
You're going to be talking about the procedures too, and maybe it may be helpful to sort of separate the use and what is permitted outright. And then when you talk about procedures, consider how the differences occur. So I think the takeaway here, Eric, is it's that the state provides this safe harbor, if you will, and in some cases, in some zones, the state allows a minimum lot size that is larger than our minimum lot size in these zones. And the commission, the planning commission, and the public input was that they wanted to provide more space on these lots where we had middle housing.
Yeah, I think there are 2 options. So just that the 2 options that we considered were, okay, we could apply the same minimum lot size as would apply for single family, or we could use this larger lot size concept. So that maybe it's not what exists now, but that is one concept that we considered.
Okay, and I mean, are there lots of these sizes in these zones?
There are. It's not, obviously the most common size lots. Things tend to develop around what that minimum lot size is in a given district. So, we do have lots of larger lots that would need to be divided to get to that minimum lot size target in a given district. But, if it's already been divided, it would be more commonly around the 3,000 square foot range. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Apologies if that's overly complicated for an answer, but I'm trying to cover the bases.
And one thing, I think the planning commission, as they were stepping through each of these decision or recommendations, they're considering, what is the minimum compliance? What is the minimum standard under the state rules? And I think that they've interpreted that to mean, what would afford the greatest sort of preservation of neighborhood character? And that's sort of where they're coming from on this. Trade-off, of course, is that with fewer lots that are meeting that minimum lot size, there's fewer opportunities for middle housing, but I think they understood that the balance here is to, comply with the rules and also try to maintain the neighborhood pattern or character.
Yeah, and I guess I will also touch on, I think we talked about, or that Carol had a comment about substandard lots. So let's say we're talking about an R5 district and you have a 4,800 square foot lot. So you don't meet that minimum lot size. We were moving forward based on the minimum compliance assumption that we've been given direction to pursue, which would mandate that we allow single family and duplexes essentially on those substandard lots, but not anything beyond that on those lots. So that would be a concept that would apply to all of the zones that we're proposing. So just to clarify.
So you're okay with that? Or no, you want our feedback on that?
Well, feedback would be great, but, just to clarify that is something we're recommending, even if it's not explicit right now. That is our direction. All right, so getting into this discussion of review procedures, and I apologize because discussion of review procedures and development processes, and it's not the most visual, so I'll try to make it quick and understandable. So, the quick summary here is that we have to subject middle housing to the same approval process that would be used for single-family dwellings in that same zone. So this is kind of required under Division 46. Now, our current processes for multifamily construction, which that's kind of what we would call middle housing today, it's currently considered a minor development decision, which is subject to additional review. It's more expensive, it has more of a process, a longer process, and it's not what we would call a ministerial decision, which is what we do for single-family dwellings. So that's a little bit more, check boxes, plan review, do you meet setbacks, do you meet lot coverage, do you meet floor area? So that's a little bit more, it's very clear and objective, whereas multifamily undergoes a development review process to determine if they meet standards. They're supposed to be clear and objective, but sometimes they involve some discretion to determine whether or not the development meets those standards. So different processes now are applied. Essentially, we're proposing to classify middle housing development as a ministerial. So this will be different than our current processes. One of the biggest differences is that for ministerial decisions, we do not require pre-application conferences, neighborhood meetings, public notice, and there's no opportunity for a public hearing. So that's something that is important to note. It is an important difference. Townhouse development would still be considered a minor decision because you'd have to go through a land division, which would require that minor development review. But for the most part, when we would do this design review for multifamily today, we're not going to be allowed to do that moving forward.
That's a question from Councilor.
I just want to clarify, that also means that for cottage clusters, there's no pre-app, there's no community discussion, and there's no way around that. That's what the state's kind of saying.
They have to be treated the same as single-family housing. Yeah, I mean, that's, I'm hoping to be direct at least, but it might not be the most direct. But so theoretically, we could change the process for single-family housing such that all of them would have to go through a minor development, but we have not received direction to go down that path.
I think that'd be a lot of work.
I think that would be an administrative overload.
What, if I may, one of the sort of ancillary or related issues that has come up as we've been discussing this is what to do, and Eric talked about non-conforming lots, lots that are smaller than the minimum lot size, and we have clear direction, I think, from you all in the Planning Commission on how to proceed with that. But what would we do with a lot that has a non-conforming development on it? The building is, doesn't meet the current setbacks, or the lot coverage exceeds what our code would otherwise require. And the rules, the state rules, do allow us to, apply the same rules that we have for non-conforming single-family dwellings to middle housing. And so we're currently on a parallel process. We're reviewing our standards for non-conforming development, as we're also looking at the definition of demolition, because the two are interrelated. And so we're looking at that. I just wanted you to be aware of that, because we're going to be coming back for a separate study session on that topic, that it is related to what Eric's talking about here. So, thank you.
Great. All right, so one thing that we may have touched on a second ago, but requires a little bit more discussion, is that whether or not you classify a development as minor or ministerial also impacts the ability for the city to apply what we call conditioning authority, requiring developers to provide public improvements or mitigate the impacts of their approved development. So typically for a single family or duplex dwelling proposal, we'd again use this ministerial process. It's managed by the buildings department, and it would include staff review by the buildings department in addition to staff review of the planning department to ensure compliance with applicable zoning regulations, et cetera, setbacks, lot coverage, all those requirements. But that doesn't really, that ministerial process does not provide an opportunity to require mitigation currently. So all development, whether ministerial, minor, or major, would still have to be subject to SDCs, systems development charges, or other fees that are designed to sort of recompense for the impact of the development. But those are sort of separate and sort of don't go to the level that we would for conditions or mitigation. They're different. So all developments are subject to SDCs and fees, but we do treat minor development and I guess major development differently for the purposes of determining conditions of approval and required public improvements. So again, this is kind of a little bit different process than we use for minor, and I'll just talk a little bit more about the minor development process. That conditions of approval is based on kind of legal principles, and it's based on sort of famous legal or constitutional case, Nolan versus Dolan. So we're looking at rough proportionality. We have to consider as policy and site-specific factors. There's a lot of legal precedent that we're bound to when it comes to those particular decisions. So just want to touch base on that.
Sorry, I couldn't help myself, but Dolan versus the city of Tigard. So
right.
And
I call them Nolan Dolan because it's
another,
not Nolan versus Dolan.
There's two cases.
I I'm getting my land use law all jumbled up in my head, of course. Anyway, so what we're proposing, it's not Nolan versus Dolan. That's why we have Evan Boone here for this usually. We're proposing new clear and objective mitigation requirements for all ministerial applications. So that's our, this is our proposal to sort of compensate for the fact that we don't usually impose conditions of approval on ministerial developments. We're proposing to develop sort of a new process that will allow the city the ability to use a more clear and objective process to determine what the appropriate mitigation would be for development. So I think, if I were to use an example, just thinking about what would be a proportional development, there would be currently under our system today, if a single family dwelling came in, we wouldn't necessarily, we could require fees and SDCs, but we couldn't require street frontage improvements for single family and duplexes today for ministerial developments generally. So that's something that we're able to require under conditions of approval or under this sort of rough proportionality test that, we are hoping to develop, a little bit more of a clear system that would be applicable to all different types of housing based on the intensity of, the density proposed on that site. So anyway, this is something we're proposing that would be a clear and objective process, but we'd also offer an alternative path in case people, for whatever reason, wanted to use a discretionary process to determine appropriate mitigation. So I guess I can pause there for questions. I know this is getting a little bit complicated. I know this is a lot of just new processes that we're proposing. So if there's anything I can help to address at this point before we move forward.
Very good job explaining it. Councilor Mance.
So if thank you, that was very clear for some really dry information, so much appreciated. If I'm understanding this, we do have some leeway on the proportionality aspects of improvements that might need to be made. Okay. That was my question.
Currently we have the authority under the state law to apply this mitigation to single family. We just don't.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So we want to have a streamlined process to do that.
Clear and objective, yes, thank you.
And it's sort of the premise behind that, and the reason that we haven't had that in place is that, it's presumed that these lots that exist and that all went through a land division process where public improvement standards were applied, that they have, the right to develop with single-family dwellings, and therefore there isn't any nexus or proportionality or impact to mitigate by requiring like a sidewalk or a wider street, for example. But with middle housing now being allowed and the theoretical density going up, that would be the sort of the nexus or the legislative, purpose behind having that authority. We will need to have very clear and prescribed standards, and it may be that on an individual lot basis, really the city is only requiring, not exacting, not conditions, but actually just standards that require the dedication of additional right-of-way, and that may be all that is really, warranted under the code. Whereas if it's a quadplex or a cottage cluster or something with more impact, then this would scale up accordingly. And so, you could probably think of a few examples in the city where having something like this, even for single-family development, could have been beneficial. It could have been helpful. Substandard streets, narrow streets where we didn't have the right-of-way. So we're looking at it as an opportunity for process improvement in our current system, as well as meeting these state requirements. So, thank you.
Councilor Burdick.
And I think this probably goes without saying, but I just want to clarify, this will probably be, will staff kind of draft something, put it through the planning commission? What's kind of the process? Because this is fascinating to me, so I'm actually looking forward to seeing it.
Yeah, this would be included in our draft public review of for public review of the code amendments. So it would be contained in the code itself.
Councilor Wendland.
Have we gotten to the garage part yet, or is that too late?
So what is your question related to garages?
So if you build a fourplex where a single family is going to be, what are the changes for garages? Because most people don't understand that garages are different than housing. They're gonna look at a house and when you build the house, if there's 4 doors in it, they won't necessarily see a big difference with that. But what they would see is the garage part, right?
Yes, and so if you're referring to the proposed changes for garage standards, we will definitely go over those in a few slides. I have some slides on that.
I have so going back to this question of the lot, the minimum lot size, lot coverage. So when I was going through this, I thought, well, looking at those particular, like the R2, R3, I mean, those zones seem to be the ones centered around our, commercial centers, right, downtown. And Lake Grove kind of seems like, from a land use perspective, like where we'd want density, right, around town centers, close to transportation, like more walkable, et cetera. So I'm just having trouble thinking through the logic, of precluding the more dense use in the area that we typically leave to more density,
Yeah, I think that's a good observation. I think typically the logic is that was explained of the folks that, supported that concept was that the larger lots would be more appropriate for more units. They would just lend themselves to it. Of course, that might sort of work itself out. Developers probably wouldn't be trying to cram a cottage cluster on a 2,000 square foot lot. But I think the other was just to limit the applicability.
Yeah, because I mean,
that was
just like to my colleagues, we look at the homes that go on the smaller lots. It's not like they're huge, So I guess I'm not seeing much of a difference between a triplex and a 5,000 square foot single family home. So I don't know. I'd be open to expanding applicability, especially since it's centered around the parts of town we've designed for that kind of dense use. Because it seems like otherwise we're just precluding the use in a chunk of the area where it would be best suited anyway.
So that is maybe that's a good policy question, and that we were, pursuant to the direction that we're minimum compliance path and looking at the state rules that say that it is required that we allow middle housing in zones that are primarily single-family detached zones, and that's the language that we're following. So that the option exists. It may be something that you want to take up when we get into the next phase of the housing work, which is HB 2003, where we'll be looking at what are the additional measures or opportunities the city would want to pursue for housing production.
So, but before you leave this, I don't want to, it's not that those housing types wouldn't be allowed in those zones.
Well, they're allowed.
It's that they wouldn't be eligible for a ministerial review. They'd have to go. So I do think that it is a good policy question, but I don't think we should leave thinking that you couldn't do them.
That's right.
You could do them, you just would have to go through the entire land use process, which would allow the neighborhood involvement, the pre-application conference, and actually a conversation about conditions of approval. So it's just that you wouldn't get to jump past that.
And also the applicability of the design overlay requirements that exist in the downtown redevelopment district and Lake Grove overlay in these areas, that I think the rules would preempt some of that. But unless Eric has anything to add.
No, I think that's a good point. It wouldn't be outright prohibited. It would still be able to be constructed, but it would be a more onerous process than those other less dense districts. So
well, they're permitted outright. So let's get that straight.
Right.
And the process is it's not a conditional use, but the standard, it's a higher standard than what the state would allow us to impose.
No, that's a good clarification. But it leads to my next question, are kind of around these conditions of improvement. So how would we prevent those from just becoming a barrier then to a barrier to non-single family developments? That's kind of what I think about here too. Are we just tacking on barriers to things other than single family homes being built?
I think the idea is that there would be proportional requirements. I don't think that it would overly, at least we wouldn't be allowed to do anything that isn't clear and objective, right? So we'd have to treat things similarly based on intensity of uses, et cetera. So, I think in a lot of ways this is intending to respond to concerns that, the city hasn't proposed to update their citywide infrastructure planning to accommodate middle housing. Of course, we'll get into our housing needs analysis and talk more about housing and whether or not we can fill our needs related to housing. But we did have City Engineer Erica Rooney talk about this a bit, and she recommended handling this on more of an application by application basis as opposed to this larger assumption that just all lots will develop as quadplexes or something, which we don't see as being very likely.
No. Yeah.
So.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, no further questions.
But, you know,
For the garage.
I think there's also another policy question as to whether or not this new process could, you know, be seen as a disincentive in some way.
Right.
It's, the point is taken.
Yeah.
All right, so jumping to a different topic kind of altogether, we're just going to discuss really briefly the dimensional standards that we discussed with the Planning Commission and how those would apply to middle housing. So just as a really, really broad overview, dimensional standards establish a basic envelope, building envelope on a lot, things like front yard setback, rear yard setback, side yard setback, front and side setback planes, maximum floor area ratio, lot coverage, height. All of these things are accounted for in what we call dimensional standards. And essentially, the recommendation is to apply the existing standards that we have for single family to duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes. A little bit complicated for townhouses and cottage clusters. I'll talk about that in a moment. But more or less, the same standards would be applied to these types of development. So this kind of illustrates what that would look like. You can imagine this kind of taking a different form. What you see on the slide is a quadplex, but you can imagine that a single family house could also fit within that same envelope, and that's what we use currently, more or less. So that was the direction that we got, is really to apply the same standards for single family to these middle housing types. When it comes to townhouses, we would apply it to this new term that we're introducing into the code for townhouse project. So essentially, we'd be able to regulate a townhouse project the same way that we would other middle housing structures, while still allowing the townhouse units to meet the definition that we're required to abide by on the state level, which is that all townhouse units are on their own lots. So, you know, obviously we can't apply a 15-foot side yard setback on an interior of a townhouse lot and still meet the requirement. But we can apply those to the townhouse project, but not to the individual townhouse units. So again, those same standards would be applied here. So when it comes to cottage clusters, things are more complicated. The city, to say the least, city doesn't have much discretion with cottage cluster regulations. There are some things that we do have discretion on, and we talked about those, and I will talk about those with you in a moment. But just to go over the things where we don't have much discretion, essentially in the model code, they outline numerous dimensional standards that must be applied to cottage clusters. So this is the minimum compliance track. Minimum lot size is no greater than 7,000 square feet, or the minimum lot size applied to single-family houses in that zone. Minimum lot width is no greater than single-family. Density cannot be applied to cottage clusters, though they have to meet a minimum density. They cannot have setbacks greater than 10 feet on any side. They cannot be separated. We can't require that they be separated by more than 10 feet. The building footprint must be less than 900 square feet for a cottage cluster unit, 900 square feet or less. Maximum lot coverage cannot be applied to cottage clusters, so just in a general sense, that footprint sort of serves as a proxy for lot coverage. Floor area ratio also cannot be applied to an entire site on a cottage cluster, but we can apply some maximums to the floor area of individual units, which we'll talk about in a bit. Maximum height cannot be lower than 2 stories, and you cannot require more than 1 space per unit for a cottage cluster. So that's kind of a graphic here that illustrates a lot of these concepts, but we're kind of stuck with those.
Eric, so if you take the minimum size that you could build, well, let's take the max. Okay, the 900 square foot, 10 feet. Let's say it's five cottages. what would the lot size have to be to accommodate that?
Well, it's really hard to say that because there's parking, there's a lot of other things that you need to include in your development. You can see the one that we have on the screen here is about a 12,000 square foot lot, so it would be in a R10 district over the minimum lot size, but you can see what this would look like. You get 6 units nicely situated on a 12,000 square foot lot.
And that math probably works out if you're considering a 30% lot coverage maximum in that zone based on height. It varies depending on height, but that would be an absolute minimum, and that's not, you don't know if you can fit the parking and other circulation on the lot too.
I mean, that is where the 7,000 square foot figure came from. The state determined that that's basically the minimum size of lot that could kind of fit a cottage cluster, practically speaking, not regulation.
But that's probably a 4-unit cottage cluster, right?
It doesn't have to be. They can be smaller, right? They could have a smaller footprint than 900 square feet, so it's hard to say exactly.
So I see, so you could do 5 smaller
Right,
than,
they're called stand-up cottages. You can just stand up in them. Question on that, though. If, Director Siegel, you said the 30%. Can you explain that? So we're saying that code says you can only have 30% lot coverage of your house, is that right?
Well, yeah, Councilor Whalen, the maximum lot coverage is the sliding scale, and it's per zone, and it's based on height. So structures that, I don't have it memorized, but structures that are less than, I think, 24 feet in height are afforded more lot coverage than those, and it decreases as you go up. So it's, 30% was just sort of like, we're just kind of taking a number somewhere in the middle, yeah.
But that would still stick.
Yes, so the maximum floor area, maximum lot coverage, maximum floor area ratio, which is inclusive of garages, and there's some formulas involved with that, as well as height and setbacks would all be applicable to middle housing.
It would be applicable to middle housing, but floor area, lot coverage cannot be applied to a cottage cluster site.
Floor area lot coverage is right, unique requirements for cottage clusters.
Yeah, so cottage clusters are a different beast in that capacity. So yeah,
So
you can't,
basically
if they don't have lot coverage, you aren't allowed to apply lot coverage to a cottage cluster site.
So they could basically take up 90% of the lot?
Well, I think
10-foot setbacks?
there are 10-foot setbacks, there's a minimum courtyard requirement, there's required parking, there's shared access and screening for the parking required, so it's not, I think it'd be really hard to get to 90%.
Well, but I mean, by the time you put the sidewalks in and the parking and everything else, you could have a impervious, is that the right word?
Yes, if you're talking about impervious surfaces, then yes, definitely, yeah.
That basically would have lots of runoff. Oh, boy, okay.
well, there's stormwater requirement.
You have to manage your
Yeah.
stormwater.
Yeah, you still have to manage stormwater on site, and you may recall that we discussed this with the Middle Housing Code Advisory Committee as well, the idea of impervious impervious surface limitations. And that was something that it's because it wasn't required to be adopted by the deadline, we did not move that forward, at least on this timeline. So that's something that is kind of in our back pocket, though.
Yeah, so that's a tool that we could use to say that you can't have impervious coverage of more than 50% for a lot. Could we?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how that would apply to a cottage cluster site, but generally speaking, we would have some flexibility to impose that impervious surface limitation. So I think the specifics of how that would apply to a cottage cluster site, we're going to have to talk with DLCD about if that would be considered a proxy for lot coverage or if we get into problems with them there, but I think we have some flexibility at least.
We would also need input from our engineering department as well, because pervious it's a pretty high standard, and that you think about pavers and the ability to infiltrate water, but it's more than just that. It has to be structural underneath. There has to be a drainage system for that, pervious surface. So there's it increases the cost of development too. For single family, we have to apply the same impervious limit to single family, Eric, that we would apply to cottage clusters.
I don't know about cottage clusters because they're treated differently for lot coverage. So I think that's a question I can follow up on. I'm not sure. I think we'll have to talk to DLCD about that specific question.
Council Burdick.
So can you explain to me, like, do we have, with cottage clusters, can you have like a maximum height in terms of feet? I mean, they just mentioned this 2-story, but 2-story can mean different things to different people.
Yes, it's 25 feet effectively. I think they just use 2 stories as a easier way to explain it.
So we can't have a lower height on that then?
No.
And obviously, we can't change the 10-foot front or rear setback. That's being directed as well, correct?
That is correct. I will say, we did get clarification from DLCD that our setback planes would apply to cottage clusters. So there is, some control that it wouldn't be, 25 feet right at the setback line. It would have to, abide by the setback plane requirements, which means it would have to sort of slope more gently towards the center of the site. But it still has the same maximum height. It just
But that
kind of
still
about where it's
starts at the
distributed.
10-foot point, and you
Yes.
can't have different setback planes for cottage clusters? Or can we have different setback planes for cottage clusters?
No. Yeah, we'd have to apply what we apply to single family.
And then my other question is, or just want to clarify, the minimum requirement we can have for the courtyard distance is 15 feet as well. So, I mean, they're really allowing, to Councilor Wendland's point, an extremely dense complex going on these lots if chosen to do so.
Yeah, I guess, again, there are other requirements that make it so that you would not be able to build, quite as dense as you might imagine. Again, the sort of parking screening, the courtyard, the pedestrian access, there are a lot of things that work together to limit built area, but that's right. The way that they're designed is such that there are no lot coverage requirements, and it could be quite dense. I think we had envisioned going with the minimum compliance track is, again, touching on Carol's point, to set a maximum of 8 for cottage clusters, because that's the minimum compliance track. So there could be that maximum limit. That's what we are going to propose.
Good, because I would like to see a maximum number. And I'm also very concerned, though, about these proposals and, how it's going to impact, our trees. And so I think making sure that we have a good tree code and building that kind of works together versus against one another is going to be even more critical than what we see right now, because this, to me, just kind of says, to do a cottage cluster, I think it's hard to keep some mature trees. I think it could have work, but it becomes harder to do so. So, again, I know we're working on that to get more synergy, so they're not working against each other, but I think this is a good example of why that's so important.
Yeah, you can imagine that detached structures do have a little bit more flexibility to avoid things like that. So if we are going to apply our discretionary Chapter 55 tree code, significant tree alternative criteria, there could be more flexibility for a cottage cluster than for a different type of middle housing to avoid trees.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is all theoretical, yeah.
Councilor Wendland.
So help me understand, so it says the minimum setbacks, so that if, let's say you're driving down the street and we have a 25-foot setback from the street for single-family housing, and you're in a neighborhood and everything is 25 feet back, we can still have that. In other words, if somebody bought a house, they can't go up to 10 feet away from the street, can they? And have a house?
So the setbacks would only apply to cottage cluster development. So you're correct that it would be 25-foot front setback for everything other than cottage clusters in like a R15 zone, let's say. And that cottage clusters would be subject to a 10-foot front yard setback, but not any other type of housing.
So let me go through the example then. If I'm going down the street then, and every house that has been built is 25 feet back from the street, cottage clusters, somebody could buy a 15,000-foot square lot, say, and move to within 10 feet from the street and put a 2-story house up. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is it the same for, corner lots? Because I'm just wondering the safety on the corner lots.
Typically, middle housing is encouraged on corner lots. We wouldn't limit it on a corner lot. we're not proposing.
I didn't know
that.
the setbacks, because sometimes I know for visibility, I thought,
That'd be controlled by the site distance requirements at intersections or driveway approaches. And so it may not be that you can get to within 10 feet. You wouldn't be able to, I think our standards that limit parking within front yard setbacks would apply. So I don't think we would see parking requirements being met within that, 10 feet or 20 feet.
But in reality,
There's screening requirements, actually.
Screening.
if, say, you limit it to 8 houses on a street or on a lot, you could have 4 25-foot mini houses 10 feet away from the street in a neighborhood that has all houses 25 feet back from the street. Is that correct?
I don't know that that would make sense to design it in a way that would meet the orientation requirements. Basically, the cottage cluster needs to be oriented generally towards a courtyard or towards the street, but you couldn't just do a line of 4 that were all oriented towards the street. You'd have to have a shared common courtyard that things are oriented around.
Well, I mean, here's your example. I mean, it's on the screen. What's to say that those 3 units on the right are not right up against, instead of just oriented sideways, it's up against the street?
It's typically because of frontage and access requirements, but it theoretically could be the case.
Yeah, if that's a
I mean,
corner lot,
the bulk is allowing that configuration 10 feet from the property line.
Right. If that were a corner lot, Councilor Wendland, maybe that's your, sort of worst case example.
Right.
So those 3 units are all backing up to another street. There would be a screening requirement there, as I understand it, right?
No, there's a screening requirement for the parking, but not for units.
Okay, so, yeah, the answer to the question is yes.
So in other words, somebody could be driving along and totally out of character with the neighborhood, I guess is my point.
Yeah, the concept of cottage clusters is meant to redistribute that front setback area into a more internal focused courtyard. So that's kind of the concept, is that you can't have a reasonable courtyard. And you can argue that 15 feet wide is not a reasonable courtyard, but you're definitely not going to get a reasonable courtyard if you have to comply with underlying setbacks. So there's flexibility for the setbacks with the idea that there will be more open space in the center of the site. They're to allow for it, at least.
Right, I get that. I'm just saying, within the neighborhood, you're really introducing a completely new concept that is going to, sit out like a sore thumb.
Well, we're required
In some
to
people's,
introduce
right,
it, yeah.
in some people's estimate or opinion, and other people think it's going to be wonderful.
Yeah,
Is that
or the cottages could have a really high level of finishing and detailing, and they could exceed the appearance of the house next door that was built,
Yeah, we've heard, of course, people's opinions on different types of housing run the gamut. There's a huge spectrum, but I would say there's the most support for cottage clusters out of any of the other middle housing types that we've heard.
Yeah.
But maybe that's, there's a lot of pretty images
Until
out there.
one goes in your neighborhood next to your house. I think that's the,
yeah. I would just say, I think you can make cottage clusters be absolutely amazing, and to your point, Director Siegel, you can, with high-grade finishes and everything, they can be fantastic. I guess my concern is some of these mandates by the state, 15 feet is probably from, me to Martha, or City Manager Bennett is more than 15 feet. So we're not talking about a lot of space. So I think that's where you get some of the frustration from myself and some of my colleagues, is just the reality is the state's making us do some things that we're not seeing where this could be the ideal. So as you mentioned, 15 feet might not be great, but we can't do much about it. And I appreciate both of your optimisms of this could work. So thank you for that. Can we set a minimum? We have the maximum building footprint at 900. Can we set a minimum building footprint?
No.
Okay, so that's the discretion of.
Can we set a minimum floor area? Maybe that was a related
No,
question.
well, it says in your bullet on page 13, maximum building footprint must be less than 900 square feet.
Yeah, so we can't set a minimum, but the state set a maximum that we have to sort of abide by. That's meant for individual cottage units.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's footprint and floor area, which are two different things.
Yes.
Can we establish a floor or minimum floor area?
I don't know that, I think you can. I have not looked into that. I can't think of why not.
So we might want to explore that. And I think that goes to some of the, concerns that you might hear about tiny homes and just how small is, too small maybe. I don't know. We haven't looked into that, but.
I think I also have a concern, like, we have a lot of discussion in our community to say we want to have housing for seniors, we would like to have housing for people with disabilities. And when we start kind of creating the scenario where it makes more sense to build up, that means we have stairs, which are harder for our seniors, and depending on disability, may be harder on that. So I feel like we're not doing a lot to address getting some flatter building types. And again, a lot of this is the way it's directed, we're doing the best we can. But anything we can do, I think, to help encourage some flatter units, again, that don't require stairs, or at least allow enough to have main level living, because some of these are getting, small if you're getting older and you have a walker, you're in a wheelchair, you need more space to get around, which means, your bathroom needs to be larger, your bedroom, your hallways and so forth, and that all adds up in space.
Right.
Yeah, we thought about ways that we could encourage that outcome, or perhaps try to encourage like a 1.5 story type outcome, but we really didn't have many options. There really isn't much we can do. Yeah.
Thank you for
Yeah.
Thank you. Councilor Rath.
Thank you. You mentioned that, well, that's just the worst case scenario. And I can't help but think that that's what we should be thinking about only in this situation, is we should only be thinking about the worst case scenarios of this, especially after we just went through the experience of learning what the unintended consequences are and are going to be from the Citizens Initiative, and how we were caught off guard with that. This is something that I see us learning a very hard lesson down the road. And while I totally understand we don't have anything, we can't do anything about it because our hand is forced, and maybe that's what I'm most angry about, because I don't like being forced to do anything. But and so it makes me think, as we're learning about all these unintended consequences, well, we're not. I think we need to start really thinking about the unintended consequences of this. And I would have hoped that there would have been more people here in the audience listening, or we would have gotten more emails about this, but we didn't, because no one's thinking about that. And I've just been dashing down some notes. It's, for me, with the decreased setbacks, this creates opportunity to cut down more trees, right? You brought that up. With more housing units, it's going to create, and we're looking at first edition over here. If people are already scared about losing parking and having more people park on streets, it's going to exacerbate that problem. I think that it creates, just from a pure, and I may be totally wrong, but from an economics perspective, it's going to place incredible additional value on all our properties, make property and land more expensive, and just attract more developers to come in and build more expensive homes, which isn't going to serve the intended purpose of what House Bill 2001 was supposed to do. And so, and not the scariest thing for me was this process, or HB 2001, prohibits the public and the and neighborhood associations' ability to have a voice in the decisions. That's scariest to me. And so, we need to really think about worst case scenario, unintended consequences, and I would encourage staff and council to take some more time with this. We have until June, and maybe we should start thinking about some more creative solutions that we have access to make this right for our city, because one size does not fit all. And we want to make sure, to your point, why are we not thinking about our more senior members of the community? So this scares me, and it's a problem.
All this talk about the clusters just makes me think of chocolate, caramel, and nuts. It's making me very hungry. Yeah, Councilor Wendt.
Hungry now. Okay. I had two questions. First of all, the first question was, so when we go to do multiple units on a lot that was originally planned for a single structure, ideally a single homeowner, what happens when you do put 6 units on here? How does the owner do it? Could you have 6 individual owners own that, their individual cottage, and then was there like a slice of land that they get with it too, or how does that work?
It's up to them. They can come to us with a proposal, and if it complies as a parent lot, then we would allow it under a land division. It wouldn't be for cottage clusters. It's not. I think we could sort of define them to be all on one site, or regardless of how we define them, we still have to allow them to be divided and sold under SB 458.
So it could be individually deeded with their own deed and with their own.
Yeah, it could be a variety of different agreements. Basically, just trying to provide flexibility beyond condominiums.
So it would be similar. So same thing with like a duplex or triplex. You couldn't essentially still have 3, not renters. That's one thing, but if you have 3 individual homeowners, they could. If on a triplex, there could be 3 different people that own 3 different.
And we have examples of this in the community that are not middle housing, but they're like 6-unit condominium building that, very attractive building that, was created as a multifamily development and then condominiumized. And so I think in the cottage cluster example, it's a more straightforward approach where those can be divided fee simple. They have land that goes with them, and it doesn't have the, the additional costs or overhead that a condominium association would have.
I see. Okay. The second question I had was, can you go back to that slide where you had the map of the entire city, and then it showed where these, so it shows all green there. But if I heard correctly in previous comments, is that that if a neighborhood has an HOA or has a CCNRs that run with the property that exclude other types of housing, more than just a single-family home, that's not represented here, right? I mean, do we have a sense of how many of those, for example, I live in Palisades, for example, and the whole Palisades is all green, but I know that there are CCNRs and HOAs in different parts of that, and if the CCNRs and the HOAs say that one lot is to have one house that's the minimum 2,500 square feet or something, would that be, I'm assuming that's excluded, right? But if that's the case, then it would be helpful for us to also see how many of these lots in the entire city are actually impacted by this, right? I know that theoretically everything is impacted, but what extra layers after this would prevent this type of additional housing to be placed on those lots?
Yeah, if I may, Councilor Nguyen, there's so many variables, and as you know, and sort of feasibility for development, and that's just one layer or one level that a prospective developer is going to have to contend with. And some of the neighborhoods or some of the subdivisions within the neighborhoods, have phases within them, and they have their own. They did have an association, or at least they had CCNRs that were created, and were probably administered by the developer and then forgotten about after all the properties sold. So, those exist, and then there's also, engineering feasibility and, being able to serve multiple lots or multiple dwellings and so. So what I'm getting at is that it isn't really feasible for the city, I think, to project, which of these areas would be ineligible given current CCNRs that would require a legal analysis, honestly, frankly, and that's not really the city's role to do that, analysis on private agreements and CCNR. So that's kind of we did go down that path, and initially I was like, yeah, I want to see a map. I want to see that layer on the map, and I think we were convinced by legal staff and others that it wouldn't produce a very meanuful or helpful result.
Yeah,
long hours of intern work that, high-paid intern work.
Yeah, no, I would argue that maybe this map may not be as helpful as we might be, because it looks rather alarming. It looks like the entire, that every single lot in the green could be potentially a duplex, triplex, or quadplex. That's not the case. And so I just don't want, when we look at this where we don't see this thing, and it's like, well, we could quadruple the number of homes that we are there in all the green areas here, and that's just not accurate. So
that's fair. That's fair comment. Yeah, we can look at the zoning map would be.
When I first saw that, I was like, wow, that's a lot of a lot extra density, but some of it's gonna be automatically precluded by the CCR's HOA, so, yeah.
To my previous point, we kind of have to be conservative here. We don't want to give people the impression that this isn't possible, because it will be possible. Those private agreements are private and subject to change, and they're not within the city's purview. And so, we can control, what is within the city's purview, and we have to comply with that. And from the city's perspective, it's allowed. So, I would feel uncomfortable saying you're not going to get middle housing in Palisades or something, for instance. I wouldn't want to make that assumption. We'd have to plan for the worst case scenario, as Councilor
No, but I
Rapp.
just see the map, it just looks like it's,
Yeah, 6,000 square foot lot is where you can do it. I mean, that's any lot in Lake Oswego.
No.
My lot's 10,000. And most lots are like 10, it's 100 by 100,
there's
right?
all, 5,000 everything.
Yeah,
have a
it's a
large lot.
bigger lot.
Well, that makes you feel better.
Will you finish,
Yeah,
Councilman?
I'm finished.
Okay, and before we get, and then Councilor Boop and Councilor Mans are waiting, but before we get too far away from the cluster thing, to Councilor Burdick's point, when I was thinking about specifically the seniors and just the nice kind of configuration and thinking that minimum 5, well, here we go, that minimum, 5, I just think wonder, is that leading to a smaller, taller versus, a 4, and I get where they're going. It's like, oh, well, if it's 4, then this is just a quadplex broken up into. But I mean, they're really different, and maybe that's something for us to think about. What with some of these intentions to kind of create this more unique standard from the others, but are we are there some unintended consequences there? With going that direction versus keeping it at a 4, where you might have a more livable cluster. So
I can get into that if you'd like to. That's the next slide, but.
oh, okay, we'll at the questions and then.
Okay.
No, and yeah, it's mainly me, it's what I think is we need housing, and my only fear, and I don't know if I understood, that the SDCs, when people are building this kind of dwellings, they're not required to SDCs, is it?
Yes, SDCs are required for all building permits, more or less.
Yeah, except for affordable housing, as the council has redefined that or established different criteria.
Yeah, there are
Okay,
exceptions.
but and my other thing, is there a maximum, like saying you cannot build in any given lot this number of clusters, like of cottages in for example, you have 20, because people can come and sections, lot of acres and then build clusters. Is it going to be allowed?
So under minimum compliance, the city does have the option to set a maximum of 8 units within a cottage cluster. So based on the direction, that's what we were going to propose. So we can set that maximum for a cottage cluster and for townhouses as well. So.
And we can't.
Yes.
We
Yep.
can.
Yep.
Okay, good.
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
Oh, good, yeah. And I'm not worried about, the setbacks, because we there are some areas where we have, like when people want to build quadplex, triplex, do we have, what kind of setback is required for those?
The same that would be required for a single family. So depending on the zone, it would be different, but larger than 10 feet in the front generally and in the back.
And wow, that's interesting. Okay. No, they won't come. But, and the other thing is, I really trust our staff on this engineering and building, that we have to see the spirit of the law, that, the state wants people to have affordable housing, but is it like what Councillor Raff is saying, that people can come and build units that makes it more expensive than what we were expecting, that when we have clusters, normally people should be able to afford that, but when we know that they can be deeded and each individual can have one, aren't you afraid that they would make it more expensive, that it's no longer affordable? And for that reason, the law has no,
Can I?
yeah.
I think the law is to promote middle housing. It's
Yes.
not to promote affordable housing. So don't mix the two.
No,
This
yeah.
is just for density, not for affordability.
It's about increasing supply of housing, and I think, yeah, the price or the cost per square foot on these middle housing types, cottage clusters, is going to be higher, per square foot than a larger volume home. But, it's all relative. So you see townhomes, we've seen townhomes developed in this community that are more expensive than detached single-family homes.
Yes.
But we've also seen, that there is a supply of smaller units, condominiums primarily in certain neighborhoods that are more economical. And so, on just a land economic or, housing economics, the smaller unit will be relatively, lower
that's
cost.
what and if it's like, I agree with you, but then why would we not try to find ways that allow us not to accept people to build all these clusters, cottage clusters in our neighborhoods? Because if it's not helping people to acquire them, but just build capacities for other folks to make more money and to change totally, because imagine that you have these in some areas, like many of them, and it's possible to have many of these. What I'm saying is, you can have these clusters if here was a residential neighborhood, that you can have one here, and they jump another block and have it. Is it allowed? Or is it just what they can have, what is available in terms of land?
So there would be that maximum, basically it would be a minimum of 5, maximum of 8 cottage clusters if they meet the minimum lot size of 7,000 square feet, under our proposal at least. So yeah, they would be able to build them on any site that meets the 7,000 square foot minimum. So I think just to address some of the comments about affordability, I would just remind folks that we did get some recommendations from the Middle Housing Code Advisory Committee to explore incentives to encourage affordability and accessibility of these units. So we were asked to sort of postpone that a bit until we had adopted all of the required amendments, but we do intend to look into that in a lot more depth and later in the year when we look into housing needs analysis, housing capacity for House Bill 2003, and our required housing production strategies. So that's, when I say there's a lot more to come, that's kind of what I'm referring to.
Okay, thank you. That's what I was going. Thank you.
Do you guys have, you have to talk about garages still?
If you want me to continue the presentation, I have more.
Has a question.
Okay.
This may not be germane to this particular discussion, but as we looked at that map around Lake Oswego, there's a portion of Lake Oswego that is in unincorporated Clackamas County. And we don't know what standards yet Clackamas will follow. If ours are more conservative and say theirs are more generous, for example. So how would that work if someone owned a property that is in Clackamas County and they wanted to annex in order to build? Would they then have to follow our building code as they currently do, or could they apply standards that Clackamas County determined?
If they want to annex into the city, they would be subject to our regulations.
Subject,
yeah.
okay.
If they need to connect to any of our services, then they would require.
Our growth management agreement with the county requires it for a certain level of development that they are required to annex and connect to our services.
Okay, so if it were, for example, 3 cottage clusters, because there's a lot of large lots still up there, would that jump then to become a minor development, or would it still remain ministerial?
Oh, the annexation process isn't going to be changed, so the same annexation process would apply. So if you have to annex to develop middle housing, it doesn't sort of, make it so that you don't have to go through the annexation process just because it's middle housing. It doesn't trump that.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right. All right, so as I mentioned, there isn't a lot of flexibility that we have, but we do have some flexibility when it comes to cottage clusters. So let's talk about the areas where we do have a little bit of flexibility. When it comes to the number of units in a cottage cluster, we have flexibility to set that at 3, 4, or 5. That's what the state says we can do. We recommended setting it at a minimum of 5 units per cottage cluster because we thought that would be an easy delineation between other types of middle housing. So you have triplexes that are 3 units, quadplexes that are 4. Cottage clusters could make sense as a natural sort of step up to 5 units. Another reason that we thought this would be beneficial is because we did hear previous council direction that there was not an interest in detached plexes or allowing detached plexes, even though that was a recommendation from the committee. So we thought that when you're getting into 3 or 4 unit cottage clusters, there are differences, but they, in a lot of ways, seem similar to detached triplexes and quadplexes, even though there are these additional standards that we would apply to those that would be specific to cottage clusters. But we did think that we wanted to avoid any confusion there, so that's what we proposed. So there could be benefits or not, because in some ways you're also requiring a minimum of 5 units for all cottage clusters. So that is requiring denser cottage cluster sites in some ways. So there are drawbacks. So we can talk about that right now. I can get into the size of units within a cottage cluster that might be pertinent and sort of worth considering along with this. So essentially what we're hoping to do, and again, I'm talking about things where we do have some discretion to, as a city, set our own unique regulation. So we have recommended setting a maximum average size for units within a cottage cluster. Generally speaking, we're hoping to make the combined floor area of all the cottage cluster units as similar as possible to the floor area that's allowed for a single family dwelling. So looking at the combination, if you have 6 units in the image today, adding up the floor area of all the 6 units, we're trying to get that as close as possible to the floor area that you could fit within a single family residential structure. So based on that concept, we determined that the maximum average unit size in sort of medium and low density districts should be 1,000 square feet to sort of maintain that consistency, and that for lower density districts, we would have a larger maximum average unit size of 1,200 square feet, just sort of count for the larger size of those lots a bit as well. But also, to keep it as close as possible to what we would permit for single family in total. So, I know that Mayor Buck, you had some comments on this, so, I guess it's a good time to discuss these decisions, because we do have ability to discuss different options here.
Right. Well, so I think Eric explained it really well, the trade-offs in the, 4 or 5, do you want to create more dense cottage clusters or allow more, flexibility within the cluster sphere to create units that could be more, livable for, especially thinking of seniors. It's a real, popular use for that. It does seem to me so different than the requirements of, say, like a quadplex. Totally different, But with this 1,000 square foot, so that's the square footage of the entire dwelling?
Of the cottage cluster unit, not the combination of all the units, but just one.
Well, per unit, all floors though.
It'd be an average, right?
Maximum average, yeah.
I see.
So it'd be an average.
Look pretty small. Yeah, Councilor Wendling, what do you think?
No, I like your reasoning, and I like the 5 units, and I'd put a max at 8. But I think that I like your idea of, so if it's 1,200 square unit, square feet, if you have 5, that would give you a 6,000 square foot house, or 6,200 square foot maximum house, which would happen on one of those lots anyway, correct?
Generally speaking, yeah, we have some tables that we included in our planning commission staff report that sort of walk through this a little bit more in detail.
Right.
But I unfortunately didn't include them in this slide.
But in essence, your philosophy is to mirror what we would allow on that lot with a single-family house with the mini houses or whatever, cluster houses, cottages. So, okay, yeah, no, I think there's logic in your reasoning, and I love logic, so.
We actually do have the ability to impose our own logic here, so it's a unique opportunity in this context. Yeah.
This state granted us an exception.
Councilor Burdick.
I really appreciate your thought process through this as well, and I lean towards the 5, minimum 8 as well. You know, again, that may be something that we change later, but I think that's a good starting point. And again, I like your logic, but I just want to clarify that this is the average, so they could have some that might be smaller and some that might be a little bit larger, so it's just to get the average. So I actually think that's a pretty cool way to do things as well, just to get some variety within it. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And I think the diversity of housing is something that was a huge goal for House Bill 2001. So we wouldn't want these to look like standardized, cookie cutter units necessarily.
Councilor Wynn.
So earlier in the presentation, I think George Oswego brought up tiny homes. So when we talk about tiny homes, are we going to propose any restrictions on manufactured or prefabricated structures to be put on?
You're not allowed to under state law. You don't have to allow them to be on wheels, though. A lot of those tiny homes are on wheels. So, but no, there's state preemption on distinguishing between how a house is built.
So somebody could, get 5 manufactured homes?
I just am not seeing the market really supporting that. I could be delusional, but it just doesn't seem like. But there are all kinds of new manufacturing processes, and a lot of stuff could be semi-prefabbed someplace else, and you might not even know it as you went by.
That's true, yeah. And the conventional, manufactured home that you think of or that you see, typically they're side loaded, I believe. They're not, you don't enter them from the end. So I don't think that it would be difficult to meet the orientation requirements of this cottage cluster code with those. But I think, City Manager Bennett is correct in that there are a lot of different types of modular housing and prefabricated housing that is out there now. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, please.
All right, I will proceed. So getting into design standards, these are similar but very similar rather to dimensional standards, but different in some respects in that they are a little bit less defined in our code. Basically, design standards in our code currently include parking requirements, landscape and open space regulations, access and driveway standards, garage location and appearance standards, things of that nature. In general, we receive direction to apply, and we have the ability to apply the design standards that we apply to single family to new middle housing. Generally speaking, we intend to do that, but we did receive direction to sort of look into in a little bit more depth garage appearance standards. Picking up on what Councilor Wendland mentioned a moment ago, you could imagine that with the increase in density that, perhaps the impact of seeing a few more doors might not be that big of a deal, but one real thing that we could see is a lot more garages and a lot more need for garages. So how do we address this in a way that complies with the minimum requirements but results in a positive design outcome? Really kind of trying to avoid those negative visual impacts. And just as a reminder, obviously folks are concerned about this, but this was also the #1 biggest concern that was identified in our survey from a year ago that folks felt was the most important physical characteristic of their neighborhood, or rather it was the least desirable physical characteristic were the prominence of garages. So existing standards that we have in the code related to garages and driveways place a limit on the number of driveways per lot, limit the maximum driveway width, the maximum width of a garage as a percentage of the width of a facade, or as a percentage of the width of the lot, rather. Garage recessing is encouraged by our standards. There's different options. And you also have the ability to apply some different elevated standards, but it's an encouragement for recessing. It's not a requirement, and there's sort of a set of options that you can choose from currently. So what we're proposing, though, for driveways is to, sort of apply some of the existing standards. So there is that current limitation for 1 shared driveway per 75 feet of lot frontage that we would propose continuing to apply to middle housing. Of course, this is different when you think of a townhouse, because a townhouse is on its own lot. So under this definition, townhouses would each be able to have their own driveway entrance or driveway on the lot frontage, driveway to the street. So, basically to account for some of the impacts of applying our garage standards more heavily, essentially, to townhouses in these narrow lots, we thought that it was appropriate to recommend limiting the width of these driveways to ensure that, essentially these driveways don't take up more space than the width of the garage, to limit impervious surface in areas where we have a little bit of ability to do that, but have to at least allow for these driveways to serve the townhouse. So when it comes to garage-specific standards, we really try to think about this in more depth when it comes to townhouses and narrow lots. So we do have existing standards, as I sort of mentioned before, but we wanted to enhance them. And again, to discourage these overly prominent garages that are visually displeasing. One of the main takeaways that we had from some of the work that we did with consultants that were working with at Cascadia was that garage recessing seemed to be the most important element of the sort of design of a garage that had the most impact compared to some of these other measures. So essentially, we're going to be requiring that for all garage standards. There would be a certain amount of recessing required. We'd essentially, for the first time, sort of decide to apply garage width standards to narrow lots. So currently there's an exemption for lots that are less than 50 feet wide. You don't have to apply garage standards. We're saying we think that we should apply garage standards to those narrow lots now, but we think that they should be right-sized to the lots. So essentially we're proposing sort of a scaling standard that would increase in intensity depending on the garage width as a percentage of the facade. So if you want to have a rather wide garage on a narrow townhouse lot that takes up to 75% of the lot or of the facade, we would require that you do more in terms of design mitigation. So we would ask you to recess it more. We would require more fenestration. We would require 4 design features as opposed to 2 or 3 with some other options. So again, these would kind of scale in intensity based on the width of the garage. And we thought that was a good middle ground because we're not really allowed to scale garage standards by the number of dwelling units. It's just a middle housing Division 46 minimum compliance rule. And so, we thought that scaling it by the width of the garage as a percent of the facade would be a direct way to sort of address this issue. So it's a bit complicated. I think, that's probably going to be the biggest challenge is administering this in a consistent way internally. But we do think that this would be the best way to sort of account for, provide some flexibility to allow for garages on townhouse lots, but also impose standards to ensure a good design outcome. And then, I know that there were other questions about that, so I can pause now if there are other follow-up questions about this specific proposal.
Okay, Councilor Burdick?
Go ahead.
No.
So my question is, getting back to the garages, let's say that you have a fourplex that's taking the size of a house that is on a lot. Where would the garage go and how much can you, because back to Director Siegel's thing at the 30% or whatever, however that equation is for the lot, can you just add, they can't add like a four garage building in front of the house, or do we have some control over that, I guess?
So you'd be able to construct an accessory garage still. It would still be, it would go towards your lot coverage though. So
Okay.
there are restrictions on the size of the accessory garages that you can construct. And, we wouldn't require any configuration. What we're talking about really with these standards are front-facing garages. So if you're a side-facing garage, or if you face the alley, then you wouldn't have to comply with these standards. So
But you would still have to do.
There is a
lot.
possibility for different side and front configurations, but
Okay,
yeah.
but my point is that if you have a fourplex, does that, do you have to put in 4 garages? I mean, single garages for, I mean, is that kind of like the deal? Do they have to have or?
You have to have 4 off-street parking spaces, so.
Or off-street, okay.
Yeah, they don't necessarily have to be enclosed in a garage. They can't be within the setback.
But so can they put a parking lot in front of their house then?
No, it couldn't be within the setback. The required parking couldn't be within the setback.
Okay, so we have, I'm just trying to figure out any holes that we have so that it would take away the natural, so it wouldn't be an oddity in the neighborhood, I guess is what I'm saying. So under this garage logic that you put together, which I do like, that there's a formula to follow, it would somewhat follow the standards of a house so that even if you put 4 garages, 4 stalls in, it would still have to conform kind of with the neighborhood.
Yes, yeah, this would apply to single family as well. So I think that's something that I want to make clear is that this change, we're proposing this change, but it would also impact single family because that's the way we can sort of get around the requirement. So yes, I mean, essentially it would limit, just really looking at the garage as a percentage of that facade, if you're taking up a much larger percentage of the front of the house with the garage, then you have to do a lot more stringent design of your garage. And that would apply, it would be an enhanced or more stringent version of our garage standards than what we have today. So it would apply the same to single family moving forward, but theoretically it would be better design than what's required right now.
Great, thank you.
I think when we say more stringent than we have today, what we're talking about is for lots that are less than 50 feet.
Yes,
And width,
yeah, narrow
because currently
lots.
we don't have the same set of standards for those narrower lots.
Okay, Council Burdick.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding. So for lots that are 50 feet wide or less, they can now have up to 75% of that be basically driveway.
Well, currently they're allowed 100%.
Okay.
So currently they are exempted from not only the garage width standards, but all garage standards.
Good to know.
Yeah, so we thought that if we're going to be introducing the standard to these narrow lots, then we'd want to provide that flexibility, but with caveat that you have to, make this a nicely designed garage if it's wider.
No, I really like the design standards and how you're looking, so well done on that. I just thank you for the clarification on that they could do 100% now, because I'm kind of like, oh, having 50 feet of, hard surface isn't attractive. So that was my only concern, but it sounds like this is actually in some ways an improvement on that. And then with these other design standards, it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, the typical for, 60% is the maximum on lots that are over 50 feet in width, but for lots under, there's no standard. So we're hoping just to introduce appropriate standards.
Okay, please.
All right, I'll keep going. All right, and so I will touch really quickly on design standards for cottage clusters. We can, apply all of the design standards in our current code to cottage clusters as long as they're not in conflict with the model code. And we're not aware of anything that's in conflict in our building design standards currently for cottage clusters, at least. But we also really are recommending incorporating the model code design standards because they go beyond what our design standards would do and are specific to cottage clusters. So this is where the common courtyard and design requirements come in, pedestrian access, the parking design and screening requirements come in. It's delineated between dimensional and design, but technically those are design standards that we're recommending that we adopt as well. And sort of to finish the presentation, I have 2 slides about Senate Bill 458. And so, I know we have discussed this in the past. And just as a brief review, under the bill, the city must allow expedited land divisions for middle housing, essentially to enable each unit to be individually bought and sold. And so, not only do we have to allow this, but we have to allow this through an expedited process. And this is an existing process. I'll talk a little bit more about it on the next slide, but it's similar in some ways to our existing subdivision and partition processes, but there are some important differences, so that's what I'm going to discuss. So, typically our current land division processes are either known as partitions or subdivisions. Partitions are 3 or fewer parcels, subdivisions are more than 3, and both of those involve essentially a parent lot that is subdivided to create sort of child lots that have full development rights. So that's generally what the typical partition and subdivision process allows for. Under the Senate Bill 458 process, essentially the child lots would not have development rights. That's the biggest delineation, I think. So essentially, it would only allow for the creation of new lots within a legal parent lot solely for the purpose of expanding ownership opportunities. So they wouldn't have full development rights on the newly created lots through this type of division. Somewhat confusing, but I think it's really important. You can't continue to subdivide these, and they aren't going to be subject to the same setbacks on the smaller lot that you would expect for a normal lot, but you have to comply on the parent lot at all times. So, I think it's important to point out that, you'd still have to comply with relevant building code requirements, firewalls, et cetera, have to provide separate utilities for each unit, have to provide, there's a lot of easements that are involved for these types of lot divisions. So easements for utilities, common areas, parking, and driveways to ensure access for different owners. And you cannot result in more than one dwelling unit for each lot or parcel. So again, you couldn't take that new lot and say, I want to put a quadplex here now, because it would be restricted. So, it's really intended to, as we mentioned before, remove barriers to making those available for ownership, those units available for ownership. Currently, it costs quite a bit to establish a condominium, so this is supposed to make this a bit easier and does not involve an increase in density similar to some of our other processes. And so just to talk a little bit about the sort of state process that we're required to abide by for these land divisions. So again, this is something that exists now. It's underutilized, I think we would say. It was enacted in 1995. It's defined in ORS 197360 through 380. So essentially, it's classified as minor development, but decisions are made at the staff level. But it cannot require a hearing at the Development Review Commission. So there's no public hearing for these. There's shortened, more expedited review periods for almost everything. So we have, as staff, less time to do a completeness review, less time to make a decision to approve, and there's a sort of different type of notification requirement for this application that developers need to abide by. Again, this is kind of a parallel state process to what's in our code that folks are allowed to utilize. So the process also does not allow for appeals to City Council or the DRC, but they would instead go to an ELD referee, which was appointed by Council a few years back. And they wouldn't go, if it went on from there, it wouldn't go to LUBA or Land Use Board of Appeals, it would go to the Oregon Court of Appeals, so different sort of system altogether. But it would still be minor development. It would still require a pre-app neighborhood meeting, mailed notice, and there would still be a public comment period for these types of applications. That was a lot, so I will stop. And yeah, thank you for your time. And I guess really the takeaway is that we're hoping to get input from City Council prior to bringing something to a public hearing.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, you did a great job breaking down a lot of, there really some, and I know we don't study this kind of information, super often. So it was a good refresher. For me, I think that I'm not as, just myself personally, worried about different housing types, and just as a personal preference. And, I value, different types of housing, and I could care less what if it's this type or that type, if it looks like my house or doesn't look like it next to me. So I like that variety. I think it flavors things, and but you know, done well, and I think that our task force, the Planning Commission, has done a good job in thinking of how these will integrate in the neighborhoods in a cohesive way, but that also brings what I think the benefits of this middle housing is bringing these different types of housing, which really blends into what we're talking about in terms of seniors being able to age in place. And even thinking about down the road, I mean, the generations that are coming, you know, behind us here are going to have different styles of housing that apply to them. And I think Lake Oswego's, in joining other communities, is setting itself up to be, you know, the community of the future. If it kind of can embrace this variety of housing types, it's going to become more popular as we go forward and live hopefully more sustainably. So I just want to make sure, for me, the priority is not putting up unnecessary barriers. I think there's a lot of financial inertia already in place that's going to make it difficult for these type of housing types to be built. I don't think we need to be overly concerned with the community suddenly every single lot being a triplex, a quadplex, a cottage cluster. I think that's not necessarily rational. So adding additional barriers beyond the ones that already exist just here at square one is not anything. Just for the sake, for instance, of attempting to circumvent you know, these housing types coming in. I think that we should welcome them. I think they should look good, but I don't think we need to go above and beyond to put up additional barriers, because I think there's plenty already just coming out of the gate. So those are my thoughts. Councilor Wendland.
As much as I love and respect you, Joe, I have to tell you that I think I agree with much of what you're saying in the economically, it's going to be a challenge for this to get done in Lake Oswego. But I also know that there's a lot of very smart developer types that are going to figure out ways to make money. And I've seen it in Portland, where it hasn't necessarily worked, I think, to plan. My point and my concern is that people come and they buy a house and they live in it, and they buy into a neighborhood or into an area, and it has a feel or it has a kind of a flavor that they are that they like. And I just want to make sure that we don't disrupt it so much so that it gets out of the characteristic of what Lake Oswego is about. And that's kind of the balance that I'm trying to do. I appreciate all the work. I will say Carol did a great job of, I think, outlining a couple things that her points, I don't know where her paper went, but I agree with pretty much everything that she said on the minimum floor area for a cottage cluster being 500. I like the zone standard size thing that you already talked about. I like the, to Councilor Burdick, the 5 and 8 for the cottage clusters. And then I had one other question on, I don't know if it was this council or last council, that we had that situation where we asked about a development down on 1st or 2nd Street that was a concept where they were going to build a house, and it seemed to be like for multi-use sort of under one single-use family.
Remember the boarding, it was kind of a boarding, not
Yeah,
really a boarding house, but kind of a boarding house.
Right.
I don't think that's allowed under this, though.
Yeah, it would have had shared communal kitchen facilities, rather than having each dwelling unit.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So is that wouldn't be allowed in this situation, right?
It's a different type of land use. It's not part of what we're looking at here.
Okay, so I just, I didn't know if that was a definition that we had to figure out, because I just remember that in the context, that council was not supportive of having that in that area. But I just wanted to make sure that we weren't going down that direction or being forced to go down that direction, if there's anything that we could do to stop that. So that doesn't count. Great, okay.
We're definitely, we're not being forced to do that. That is, you know, I'd mentioned House Bill 2003, and that we're going to be expected to look into different housing production strategies. So that's one route that we could explore, but I am gathering that we don't have much interest in exploring that, but that is at least one of the sort of set of different strategies that we'll be looking at later in this year. So.
Okay, great. And just thank you for all this work. I mean, this is just, I don't know if you sleep at night and dream about this stuff, but I hope not. So, but you're a planner, so that may be happy dreams. So anyway, thank you.
Counting cottage cluster units in my sleep.
Well, and we would like to thank you. We'd like to thank the council and the city manager for supporting this endeavor and appointing the Middle Housing Advisory Committee, which I think really did the heavy lifting and getting the concepts. And then the Planning Commission now is able to process that, I think, much more efficiently. So thank you for your support.
Thank you. Councilor Mans?
I turned off my light. I was basically
Oh.
just going to say thank you so much for this work, and I appreciate the balanced view that the Planning Commission and the Middle Housing Task Force brought to the fore, and your explanations of really complex stuff were awesome. So thank you. Both.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Good. Okay. Thank you very much.
Right.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for the clear direction.
Okay, we will take a 10-minute break. I say 5 and you take 10. So.
See, 55.
Then it will be 10. Okay, we are back in session. Moving on to our next study session on the wastewater treatment plant. I'd like to welcome our Deputy City Manager, Anthony Hooper, and Citizen Information Specialist, Katie Kirkland. And then joining us virtually, we have Lee Ward with APCOR. Anthony.
Start with having Katie talk about some of the outreach efforts that we've gone through, and we've gone through an extensive amount. So I'll turn it over to Katie to go ahead and talk about it. For brevity, we're going to skip a few slides here and there just to shorten things. We're going to skip this video. You can go and look at it on the website. It's there, and we recommend it. It's about 3 minutes, but we're going to just go launch into it.
Thanks, Anthony. Hi, Mayor. Hi, Council. Nice to see you. As Anthony mentioned, that video is on our city YouTube channel too. So, Council, as you know, we have developed a really robust public involvement outreach plan for the project. It provides a roadmap for project-specific communications to build awareness about the project, communicate the benefits, gather feedback and maintain support for building a new wastewater treatment facility. As part of that plan, it outlines several methods and tools of communication that we're using depending on stakeholder interest in the project. We've got the pyramid here on the right-hand side. You can see some of the audience that we've listed out as based on their interest, and then varying levels of information that we're providing to each of those stakeholders and audiences. We're utilising everything from social media to the project website that we've created, an email listserv, and also videos and fact sheets, as well as targeted meetings. On the right, you can see this is a tweet that we had recently for promoting the recent neighbourhood meeting, and on the left, on the top left, was an email that we sent out to our e-list to promote the neighbourhood meeting. Thanks, Anthony. So here we have some project benefits and messaging that we've developed. This is a framework that focuses on some top-level messaging for the project and supporting messages. And this messaging framework guided a lot of the development of more detailed FAQs that we have on the website as well, which are related to several different topics on the project. So part of the project communications strategy, we included creating a project brand, as we can see here, with this specific logo for the project, a website, dedicated email and project listserv, and these have been some really great ways and tools for us to provide information to the community and to keep people updated as we move along through the design process. One of the major goals that we had as part of our communication strategy was has been to create meaningful opportunities for community to provide input on the project throughout the design process. In October, we held our first project-hosted community information session, where the project team provided an overview and an update to folks on the preliminary design work that we had at the stage. The meeting was really well attended with 64 participants. We made the virtual meeting engaging by splitting up the presenters based on different topics. We had Q&A sessions after each of those individual topics. We also did some interactive polling, and we also had Mayor Buck and Councillor Manns and Councillor Wendland attend as well as guest speakers for closing remarks. Thank you for being there. During the polling, which is what you can see on the screen here, participants provided input on project values, their areas of interest on the project, and then also ways that we can communicate effectively with them as we continue to move forward with the design. Based on the polling results, producing clean water, increasing resiliency, and providing energy efficiency were the three most valued project values. We also have on here the importance of providing affordable wastewater service to customers and being a good neighbour. So these are the top project values that we had at that meeting. And just recently, on February 3rd, we held our required land use neighbourhood meeting. We had 58 people attend, and this was again another virtual meeting. We promoted this session quite widely, further than beyond the planning code requirements for the typical neighbourhood meeting. So we went outside to provide a lot more, to promote the meeting to a lot more folks as well. We did seek feedback on the preliminary site plans and our 30% designs and renderings, and this is prior to us submitting the formal development review application, which will be coming up soon. Questions and feedback covered a lot of range of different topics, some very technical, and based on the polling results from that meeting, participants were interested in learning more about site development, environment and sustainability, and stormwater drainage, and those were specific to the land use and design elements. So here's just an overarching schedule. So this is kind of highlighting some of the upcoming public involvement opportunities and input. These are subject to change. I mean, they've changed already based on different dates and things as we move along with the project. And these are typically aligned with where we're at with design. So key milestones that come through as we continue with the design. And this gives us opportunities to learn from stakeholders, to seek input and to resolve issues. We're planning on holding an online open house that'll be open for a period of time that we will hold later this spring, and that'll be sort of around the 60% design period. And then we will follow that with an information session so we can kind of walk through the design as well. We'll have, Anthony and I plan on attending, hopefully, the farmers market at a couple of sessions this summer to reach other people in the community to share information about the project. And then we also plan on holding a public open house around the final design stage. So planning for the fall. Thanks, Hoop. We've also held targeted meetings to discuss specific sustainability and climate-related items to do with the project. We're partnering with our sustainability program manager, Amanda Watson. To date, we've held 4 different meetings with the Sustainability Network. We've held 5 meetings with the Energy Trust of Oregon, and they're to explore sort of energy saving opportunities and how we can incorporate sustainability into the treatment plant and the design. Next week, we're also presenting to the Sustainability Advisory Board, and then we have held, and we will continue to hold other presentations and meet with other special interest groups, like, for instance, the Chamber of Commerce, neighbourhood associations, and other boards and commissions, such as like the Historic Resources Advisory Board. With that, I'll hand it over to Anthony.
Thank you very much,
Unless
Katie.
there are any questions.
For Katie, do we keep any sort of metrics on the different forms of communication that you put out and what kind of responses you get? I mean, I know it's easy with social media, but do you ever have follow-up things where you ask people, how did you hear about this meeting?
Yeah, so one of the questions actually that we had at each of the sessions was how did you hear about this session, and or you know, how would you like us to communicate with you in the future? And so we take that information and we use that. And so yeah, so there are definitely ways that we can track that.
Okay, and
Yeah.
you do have that. So if we wanted to use that for other purposes, we kind of know how people gather their information.
For sure.
Awesome.
And I know as well, I mean, with our community survey, that was also a question that was recently put out through as well with our community survey of asking broadly, not specifically this project, but in general, like how the community gets information.
And if that trended together, then that would make sense.
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
No worries.
So I wanted to first start with showing you a slide of the foothills area, and as you can see, the project site is outlined in yellow, and then you have the wastewater treatment plant below. And as we heard earlier from the Lake Oswego Sustainability Network, they had some recommendations, and their first one was maximize solar, and we're absolutely planning on doing that on site. So that one we're absolutely in alignment with. The second one was to reserve 3 acres of land, and the third one was update the foothills plan. And this has been a common theme. There's been a lot of people that want to talk about what we're going to do with the land after we're done. And as you all know, with your council goals, that's something that we're looking to discuss in the fall if this project moves forward. So they're 2 separate things. So those 2 recommendations are outside the scope of this project at this time. One thing I will mention, though, is that as you can see by this, the whole site of the Portland site where this is sited on is about 12 acres, but only about 8 acres is outside of sensitive lands. Actually, 2.3 acres is kind of hidden on this slide, and it goes behind the public storage facility that's owned by Portland, and that's all sensitive land. So once again, the amount of land that you actually have to use is about 8 acres. And I thought it was relevant for me to mention here, and you can see it in this comparison as well.
Does that include the 3 acres that they're saying to set aside or not?
No, it does not. So
Okay, so the yellow thing does not include an additional 3 acres?
No, it does not. That's just the site. So I'll touch on that briefly, which is one thing that we have looked at is what it takes to do biosolids on site. And we're thinking it could be up to 3 acres. And that would be outside of the yellow line, like you said. It would have to be part of that 8 minus 3, basically. We currently have an agreement with City of Portland, and we plan to have an agreement with them in the future to take our biosolids, which is leftover sludge, to their Columbia facility. And that's the status quo. That's what we currently do. And we're in negotiations with Portland, but all signs say that they're willing to keep doing that with us. The question, though, is if we wanted to have it on site instead, what would it look like? So we're looking at that. One possibility is lime, and that would basically mean 50-foot silos, and it really wouldn't fit into kind of this neighborhood design at all. So anything that you're looking for biosolids would be very industrial. There's a lot more potential for smell. And right now, with us leveraging the Columbia plant, we're able to use economies of scale to use some of the processes already that are very sustainably friendly. And so, but that's part of that discussion that you'll need to have in the future, is whether or not you want to carve off something. And we'll have information prepared for you at that time to share and to help inform that discussion. So we're being proactive in our thinking, but there's been no decisions or no recommendations. And of course, there's been no discussion with you all on that part of it yet. But we'll have some information that we can share with you at that time.
Okay. Thank you.
So what I want to show here is that we've been working on this project since basically 2018, with going to council back in December 2018. And we've been to council on this project 12 times. This is the 12th time. And we made a lot of decisions during that period of time. Once again, I need to mention that this project is a partnership with the City of Portland. And really, this process is trying to figure out whether it makes sense to upgrade the existing plant or build a brand new one. And all signs are showing that it makes sense to build a brand new facility on a number of different areas, including financially. I'll go into that in a second. Here is just some of the future council meetings that we plan to go to, with the go, no-go decision being September 20th of 2022 is what we're looking at. So here is the projection for wastewater rates, and it would be the same rates whether we do the existing upgrades or we build new. And so we're looking at about 3.9% increases in the wastewater fee per year. And this is what it looks like to the average, to the typical ratepayer. And and so once again, this includes, the rate increases also include all the other items for the wastewater system as well. But anyways, that's what we have projected, and we went to you with a study back in 2020 with FCS to look at all this. So this is still looking to be the case as we're in 30% design. I don't want to spend much time on this, but this is the affordability cap that I referenced before. And this is basically the project agreement of how much we pay EPCOR per year, and it's the combined amount of both Portland and Lake Oswego. And these are the amounts that would fit under our rate structure, basically.
Right. And Anthony, you mentioned in the report that the cap had gone up a little bit, 11-some million, but and then comparing that with the remodel, of course, those costs would also be going up as well. But we're not. We looked at them at one point in time, but we're not, of course, tracking. Correct.
Right. So we haven't adjusted up the cost for Portland at all.
Right.
But what I'll say here is that we still have some work to do. So that $11.3 million isn't could be whittled down. We think we will as we do value engineering. But what I'll say is that these rates up to about year 17, match exactly what Portland and Lake Superior would pay, but after that, there's a little bit of wiggle. And so there's some wiggle on the back end, basically.
Okay, thank you.
So as you mentioned, Mr. Mayor, that we are $11.3 million over the affordability cap. That matches about 2.3% of the project. And that was because cost of materials have increased dramatically in this current market that we're in. And as just a comparison, it was just released that the Willamette Water Supply Program increased their budget by $315 million and which equates to 24.2% because of supply issues. So we're pretty fortunate that it hasn't hit us to the same degree as others. And frankly, that's a testament to our team really kind of digging in and thinking through things very, very critically and looking at things very efficiently. So once again, this is another view of the proposed site. Here's a site plan. What I want to mention here is that there's a lot of work that we need to do outside of just the site, a lot of utility work. And so we have, we're actually looking to scope a pipe project right next to the site. And then there's, different stormwater work that we're going to need to do in some wastewater work as well. And there is a pump station that we need to maintain for the city of Portland. And that shows an arrow for that one that we need to create an access for them. Here's the site layout. And what I want to bring your attention here is that, once again, everything is programmed out on the site, all our processes. And what we're using is Aqua and Rada for the technology. And what that is, it's a biological granular mass process that uses sequence batch reacting. And you can see some of the sequence batch reacting trains there. There's also a headworks building which removes the grit. And then you have a filter UV building, which is like a tertiary treatment, an extra layer of treatment. And I'm going to show you some renderings now. So here's the first rendering. And once again, you have an admin building in the front, and then you have the treatment facility on the right, and well, your left, I guess. Yeah, but you have the treatment facility. One thing that is very innovative about it is that it's all enclosed, and that is not typical for a treatment plant. There's not a lot of examples of this, and so highly innovative design made possible by a very compact technology. And then you have a small little maintenance thing in the very back, and that's really for like working on a blower, for example, or a pump.
Are the little green vents, does that emit smell? All those little green things?
Great question. So within the design is odor control. And so there'll be odor control units inside the building to control smell. And we're currently looking at trying to control smell to 99% at the fence level. So very, very high levels of odor control. And I think that's one big difference on this project versus currently what we have now.
Because every time I walk by there, it's not pleasant sometimes. And so you think we will mitigate that? There will never.
You'll see a massive difference.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I'm projecting the idea of housing there. It's okay.
Yeah, and once again, it's, as you see here, the existing plan is totally open air, so you can't contain it in the building, and then there's no way to do really odor control then. And we can because it's an enclosed building. So just the design itself allows for us to do that, and it's always been a very high priority of ours, is to mitigate odor to the maximum degree that's feasible and reasonable, yeah.
Okay.
So you get a kind of a look at that there's solar panels on top of the roof for the admin building. It's not shown on the other building yet, but doesn't mean that it won't be there. We're currently working with the Energy Trust, and we're doing a feasibility study on solar panels, and we fully intend to maximize the use of that roof. So if we can use all of it, we would. We just don't know yet, so we haven't shown it, but we need to figure out if it's feasible or not. We think it will be, but we just don't know for sure. But that's something that we're working on. And so, the fourth recommendation from the LOSN was to engage in a third-party sustainability review. We currently have Corollo engineers under our umbrella, and they do a lot of review for us, and they can do sustainability as well. But then we also have been working with Energy Trust, and we're working with 2 different branches of Energy Trust, one on the admin building, but then one of their process team, and really going point by point on all the processes, making sure they're asking a lot of really targeted questions, make sure that we're thinking about how to do it in a very energy efficient way. And then there's some grants that we're going to get as part of this as well. So, and then we of course are also engaging with Amanda Watson, our sustainability program coordinator, and she has been a critical part of that. We're going to go to the SAB on Monday, and so looking forward to having some more discussion and detail on that as well. So here's another view. One thing I should mention is that, so there's some design concepts on this building that are borrowed from the neighborhood. You see the William Stafford stone columns, our poet laureate for over 15 years in Oregon. And then it's hard for me because I think of Matthew Stafford being the winning quarterback, but I promise I wouldn't mess that up and I would say it right. So, then you have wood as well, complementing it, and some of the design is meant to kind of copy some of the shelter at Foothills, some of the design elements from that. Then you have on the corner, you have kind of this metal looking kind of like bricks, and that's meant to, once again, a nod to the foundry building. So those are some small design elements that are meant to kind of copy the from around the neighborhood. Here's another look at it. There are about 22 parking spots, and there's 9 employees that are estimated to be there.
I see you put your car right in front there, Anthony.
Yeah, exactly. Another view, and you can see from Foothills Road. We are going to add a sidewalk as a public improvement on Foothills Road.
And stormwater.
Yep, and there will be a lot of stormwater work and improvement as well. Here is some of the different materials. So, once again, wood, metal paneling, stone, a variety of different materials. Okay, here's the floor plan. Pretty basic building in that there is a conference room, there is a bathroom with locker rooms and showers. The main thing here is that there's a lab, which is critically important for staff to be able to use to test how the biological process is going, and then a few offices. So, and then a lunchroom. So, very very minimal, very very small building. It's I think 6,300 square feet is what it is.
Councilor Rapp. Thank you. So, following up on our goal to make Lake Oswego like a blue zone healthy city to live in, thoughts about finding some space in that building for a gym for the employees? Some sort of small fitness center?
Okay, that's something that we can look at. The hard thing is that we're going to make trade-offs because...
Sure, I was just, first time I've seen it.
Yeah, but that's an interesting idea. There might be something we can do there. So we'll take that suggestion seriously and we'll look at it.
I mean, if you have showers,
Yeah, that's a good suggestion.
Or a track. Yeah, that too.
Well, so if you notice, there's a wide open, it's a wide open field. We don't have fencing included with this, so we like that look, and we're trying to keep it. But there is it's very important that we have a driveway that goes all the way around because we have some big trucks that need to come into the site. Really, we're not predicting anything different than what's happening already, but it's still very necessary. So on this, you can see that there's, here's the frontage of that treatment building, and the colors we're not fixated on yet. Those could be changed. Here's another look from the corner, and what I need to say is the landscaping here shows all grass, but that's not the final look. We're going to be looking at sustainable Oregon native coverage and coverings, and so right now it's going to change and look differently, but next time I come back to council, we'll have that to be able to show.
Fertilizer, we have built-in fertilizer,
Well, so one thing I want to mention about sustainable things, and I'm glad you keep me up on that, is that we do plan to reuse some of the water that we produce, especially some of the storm water. Instead of instead of putting it out into the stormwater system, we're going to use it as part of our processes inside the treatment plant. So we plan to, and also for landscaping too. So we plan to use some reclaimed water. And there's also a separate project that's being scoped to see if it's about bringing reclaimed water to Foothills Park or George Rogers. So that's still within their work. We plan to bring that in summer as well to you all for some decision making on that.
That would be the gray water.
Yes, right. Yep. And exactly. Yep.
No. Just crossing things off my list. What questions?
So here I wanted to show one kind of really cool element, which was that, as you can see, there's on the frontage on Foothills Road, there's these stone callouts that are meant to be a nod to the furnace, to the iron furnace that is currently at George Rogers. And I've actually had a conversation with Susanna Kuo with some great detail about the history of the area, and we're trying to think of, is there anything, other things we can do, such as maybe have an interactive exhibit within that talks about the history of the iron history, and there's quite a lot that happened at Foothills that history. So that's part of like what we're thinking early concept about too. So we also want to show you this. We have a generator plan to be on site. You can see that it's the white block. We feel that this is a very necessary part of this project. We do have redundant fees coming into this plant, but we think that we know that there's been a lot of failures, and it would be very prudent for us to have that proactively on. This is designed to be able to take the full amount of electrical need to run the plant. So it's sized appropriately for that. So here's just a look at the elevations. It's a fairly long wall, so that's one point to mention. So that brings me to the end of our presentation. There's some more stuff that I could have gone over and talked about tree removal and things like that, but if you have any questions about that, then I can of course talk about it, but yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Anthony. Councilor Mann's question.
Yeah, two quick questions. I know early in the process, we spoke with EPCOR about microplastics, and I think Sustainability Network brought it up also, microplastics in pharmaceuticals. And if I recall, there was talk that there would be, as technology advanced, filtration that could get to that level.
Excellent question. So I have an answer for you on that.
Oh, yay.
So Aqua Nereda does extremely well with microplastics. They actually treat to 99%. And sorry if I was stealing your thunder, Lee, but I have this memorized. So 99% through the main process. But in addition to that, whatever's left over, so let's say it's 1%, we have a tertiary cloth filter process that will get 97% of that 1% as well.
Wow.
So extremely high removal of microplastics.
Wow. That is awesome. And then my second question, if I may, is does this project qualify for the 1.5% for art, or would it not?
So we looked into that. We believe that it doesn't, but it doesn't preclude us from doing art.
Right,
And
that's fine. It was
yeah.
kind of confusing in my mind, given the structure of the project,
Yeah.
so.
We have a meeting, Councillor Manns, with the Arts Council next week as well
Okay.
to discuss that and discuss potential options, how we can incorporate that, because it's a good time to talk about that right now as we're at 30%. So yeah,
Perfect.
definitely at the forefront of our minds too.
Perfect.
Could we talk about the WIFIA?
Yes, please. Yeah, so thank you for queuing that up. So one of your motions is to authorize $100,000 for the WIFIA program. And so WIFIA stands for Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act. The EPA invited us to apply for this program and basically earmark the funding for us. And there was only 3 other organizations in Oregon that were granted that. And it allows for us to have very low cost financing. We ballpark early on this cost savings to the city to be around, or to the project to be around $30 million. It could be more than that. but it's a substantial thing. So we need $100,000 to submit for the application, and we're asking for your authorization to do that and continue moving forward.
And can you just explain a little bit how that program works?
Yeah.
What the
Yes,
significance is?
so the EPA created this program, I think something like 5 or 6 years ago, and it is meant to allow for different cities or organizations to get really kind of the lowest cost money that's available with very, very favorable terms. And so it is a loan that we have to pay back, but it allows for us to have very low interest rate, and we can defer some of our payments. There's a lot of things that we can do within the structure that are just really great for the project. And frankly, one of the downsides to doing a P3 is that you have to pay a little more for the private financing. Well, this defrays a lot of that cost because we're able to get the best of the public financing world as half of our project, which is really great. So it's a very desirable thing. We're very lucky to have been awarded it. And Lee, is there anything that you would like to add on did I miss anything?
No, Anthony, I think there are a few requirements that the EPA has placed upon getting the loan. So there's certain things like the Prevailing Wage Act. You have to meet that. You have to buy U.S. steel. And there's one more provision, and that's Buy America, which hasn't been fully implemented yet. And they're actually encouraging us to hurry up with our applications so that we won't be subject to whatever comes along once they decide what that is.
So on that note, can I make a motion?
Yeah, ready? Okay, yeah.
I'd like to move to approve submitting an application for a Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act loan for the Tryon Creek Wastewater Treatment Facility project and pay the $100,000 application fee.
Second.
Okay, is there any discussion?
This side's got it tonight.
Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Your motion passes 7-0.
And Lee said that he would donate some of the metals for our art project. So thank you, Lee, just to make this all work. So we appreciate that.
Yeah,
Hoop, as always, Hoop, you killed it. Nice work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your support, and I'd like to thank EPCOR and also Portland for being amazing partners as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Council.
Thank you for the continued good work. Okay. Okay, so now we move into council business. We have the intergovernmental agreements with the Lake Oswego School District for the Recreation and Aquatic Center use and construction. Up for consideration, we have Director Anderholm.
And proportionally, you've seen how the presentations have gotten shorter and shorter with each one. So, no.
Good afternoon, it's not evening yet. Mayor and Council, Ivan Anderholm, Parks and Recreation Director. You have before you the IGAs for both the construction and the use of the Lake Oswego Recreation and Aquatic Center. A little bit of background, these IGAs are direct result of the July 9, 2020 Memorandum of Understanding between the city and the school district to continue and create the IGAs that would reflect a share in construction cost, operational costs, maintenance, repair, and replacement costs of the new recreation and aquatics facility to benefit both the district and city residents. You have both of those in your packet, and sorry about that. I have a hard time navigating here on my computer. The project has remained the same as it was in the MOU. So the components of the MOU, which were the 25-yard stretch competition swimming pool, warm water recreational pool, dry activity and exercise rooms, park and recreation offices, classrooms, and a cardio weight room and gymnasium are still included in the project. The MOU directed us to move towards an equal allocation of costs up to $30 million for the construction IGA, and also covered methodology for allocating savings or additional costs of the project. It also has a provision for the contracting responsibilities and methodology, and then an allocation for internal project management responsibilities. And those are reflected in the IGA that's been negotiated, that's in front of you. The use IGA, which is a separate IGA, really addresses the party's share of operating costs and subsidies, the responsibilities for funding for maintenance, repair, and replacement, and also the priority and scheduling of use for the various elements within the center. The construction agreement was written based on the $30 million total project cost of the MOU. However, I do want to mention that during the June 15th, 2021 council meeting, we brought forth to council consideration of 3 different options based on our community engagement, our public engagement, and were directed to move toward what was option 3 at that time, which was a project that was at $36,846,000. At that time, with that direction, those costs were really attributed to portions of the building beyond the competitive swimming pool. And thus, my staff report reflects that the city share at this point equals $21,846,000, and the maximum share for the district is at $15 million. The overall fiscal impact to the city for these IGAs are, for the construction of the building, $21,846,000, up to $1 million in capital maintenance over the next 20 years. The agreement does split that, so we do have a set aside of $2 million for capital maintenance. And then right now the estimated, and this is a high estimate, of approximately $500,000 annual subsidy after contribution from the school district, which is found in the use IGA, over the next 20 years is $10 million. So at this time, I would entertain any questions about the substance of the IGAs. And if there are none, then I would, staff recommends that you authorize the mayor to sign both the construction IGA and the use IGA.
So, Ivan, so the cost, we have the operating costs numbers there was 3 years given, and then we're gonna revisit the cost.
Yes, so the use IGA is set up that we have the first 3 years of contributions from the school district are identified. They escalate from $265,000 to $279,000 annually. And at that point, we will revisit and look at how it is operating in real life. And those numbers are based on a formula that we use, both based on use and then actual portion of subsidy, which is the difference between a community-built pool and a competitive athletic facility that a school district would use. So yes.
And plus, $50,000 towards the capital?
Yes, exactly. And we didn't define that it had to be a contribution that came on an annual basis. What we did define is that will be defined as we produce documentation as we move through construction. There will be a maintenance and replacement manual that those numbers will be based on. It is approximately the $50,000 per year. However, if the district chooses to fund it at $1 million up front or $250,000 every 5 years, however they want to do it, we did leave some ability for them to do that.
So do we feel, comfortable with this $2 million number over the next 20 years? Or?
We do feel, with the information that we have at this time, we do feel comfortable with that. the best information that we have right now, we are comfortable with that. Now that, that doesn't take into account if we have a catastrophe, act of God or something like that. Obviously, the building will be insured for that.
Sure.
This is based on a couple other facilities that we looked at and what the anticipated lifespan for things like pumps, different major systems.
Well, I guess, so why, is there a reason why we just didn't leave them more open-ended, like, with the school district, say we're just gonna share the capital costs, whatever they end up being, and we think it's gonna be around this? Because, I mean, we're gonna be right on the hook if it goes over and they're dialed into the 50,000.
We did have conversation and negotiation over that point, and I think that they wanted a confined number in the negotiation.
I think they also want predictability. I mean, to be fair, they have to program this cost for a facility that we run. And so I think that they want to make sure that they can plan for what those costs are going to be. And because you'll remember, those of you who were here in 2019 and 2020, the original concept is that we were going to essentially split the cost of the aquatic part of the pool halvesies. But in doing that, we realized that would probably create variability for both entities, and the school district, in all fairness, said, look, we want to be able to figure out the number that we have to plug into our budgets so that we can plan for the rest of our needs. And we want you guys to make best efforts to operate that facility the most efficiently you can. So I think this is what sort of meets both of our needs.
And this is a new concept. Oh, go ahead.
No, yeah, I know you folks did a great job, but what I don't understand is, how about the 10 million?
The 10 million?
Yeah, because it will be 2 million in 10 years.
You mentioned the 10, what was that?
Oh, so the 10 million is when we're talking about the cost of the city, and that's an estimate on our operation subsidy. So on an annual basis, as we operate it, we'll recover all but about $500,000 of expenditures on an annual basis. And that, again, that's an estimate based on, the information that we have now. And so our job is to make that a reality and to improve upon that as we actually operate the facility.
Okay. Good.
Oh, I was just going to say, the set aside for capital costs, the 500,000, or not the 500,000, the 50,000 from each of us. That's a new concept for the school district. They've never really done that for facilities before. So we're going to uncharted territory for them, but they wholly agree that it's a great concept, and whether you call it a sinking fund or whatever you want to call it, I think going into partnership with the city, we both have skin in the game that way, and we're ensuring that we have set aside money for surprises, or for maybe not surprises, but for future capital work that we'll need. So it's good sound practicing, and I think it's a fair, and I have to say to Martha and Jason and Ivan, they've been a great team in putting this together. This has not been easy to put together an intergovernmental agreement between two entities that have similar but different needs. I think it's really it's a fair agreement, and I would say more than anything else, it's going to be a good relationship agreement that we can live with for a long time. So
that's great. I did have one other question. I mean, the agreement's great, but in reading the agreement, are we planning on serving alcohol at this facility?
We will have the ability to, and primarily that has to do with our function of this facility will also act as the clubhouse for our golf course. It is not going to be a restaurant and bar or anything like that. It'll be very similar to what you experienced if you went to the municipal golf course in the past. So, and I can tell you that in our public outreach, one of the things that has been very popular is when we mentioned that we will have adult beverages available And it's actually been something that we've heard very positive responses from the public on. So
that does not surprise me.
And even to go a step further, it's part of our revenue model for having a food and beverage, which we can explain how that works if you need to know. No, but you make more on the drinks than you do on the food. But I think the big thing is that this could be a wonderful event space, just the concept of how we have the connectivity between the golf course facility that we have and then the new building. They've done a lot of thought, and I mean, it could be a wedding venue. I mean, we could use the space in lots of creative ways to help offset the expenses, which we've seen with successful programs or successful facilities, having this additional part helps offset that subsidy that we would be doing. And that's one of the primary drivers, as well as providing an outlet for people that don't have the ability to maybe be parts of the country club or the Bay Club and so on. It kind of gives a great facility for people to hang out and recreate. And while their kids are recreating, the adult beverage consumers could, consume adult beverages.
So let me just be clear. So we're talking about like the golf clubhouse kind of portion of this whole facility.
It'll be integrated into our lobby. So our lobby will be where people check in for golf for all activities. The clubhouse itself will be repurposed into basically two multi-purpose rooms that can be one larger room that can accommodate meetings, small events, special events, things like that. But it'll actually be from our lobby. And then the other consideration for that is during school district events, there will be restrictions. So it's not going to be something that is all the time. Like if we have a school swim meet or something like that, we won't have on-site alcohol sales during that day or during that time frame. Okay. So we are conscious of what the OSAA regulations are, and we're working with the school district on that for.
So there's like an area where.
There's an area within the building. It would be the patio space, the current clubhouse, and then obviously on the golf course itself. We do allow consumption during somebody playing around golf.
During golf. And then I just think overall, there's overwhelming access to alcohol all throughout the community. I think our parks are nice spaces to provide an alternate to that. And of course, I'm the council teetotaler, but that is, it just... So, yes, that's right.
No alcohol.
But what's that?
No alcohol on the parks.
Well, not typically,
That's what we said.
But on the golf course, I know it's more of a cultural thing to that sport. Because, it's boring otherwise, I guess. So, the only way to make it through.
That's how you get cars, Joe. That's how you loosen up the game a little bit.
Yeah, that's how they end up hitting all those homes next to the course. The other thing is, this being and again, just because we're talking about the facility, but we've talked about this before, but this being these facilities are such a great way to provide these public spaces that are effective in helping people physically and mentally and nurturing kind of our community culture. So, it doesn't take much to look back in the news and we see things, especially the city really hasn't done much as a city in terms of providing facilities where there's youth sports, that's always been school district thing, but now we have the aquatic facility, we're doing Recife with the skate park, and so there's more of that going on within the city realm. And again, you see in the news where there's just been instances that run counter to how we would see this facility, we're running counter to creating that healthy environment. That's healthy for and welcoming to everyone. And you hear these stories where people are not, actually go to places where they're not welcome, and just horrific, things happen. And there's one investigation after another going on, and that's the school districts. But here as a city, I think we have a position where we can have facilities set up in a way that it's clear that these are places that are welcoming, healthy to everyone, and whether you're a kid, an adult, whoever it is, there's just certain behaviors that aren't tolerated to keep it a nice, safe place, because these are really great facilities we're putting together.
Exactly.
And they should be for everyone. So how that's done, we've talked about this kind of throughout our parks, and just more of a culture of welcoming and being the adults in the room and setting some kind of expectations on how we can foster that kind of community culture that I know we all support. Okay. Oh, Councilor Raff.
I would also like to comment on the fact that this is all, not too long ago, there was a feeling around the city that the city and the school district were at odds with each other. And so I think this is an unbelievably great step towards a unique and powerful relationship between the two entities, support in the benefit of health and our kids. So, and I'm in favor of the alcohol.
That's great. Yes, it's our balance. Yes. Okay.
Do you want to move? So do you want to move? Go ahead. Move.
Are you?
Okay, so move to authorize the mayor to sign in substantially the form attached intergovernmental agreement between the city of Lake Oswego and the Lake Oswego School District for the construction and use of the Lake Oswego Recreation and Aquatics Center.
Second.
All right. Is there any discussion? Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. Motion passes 7-0.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I would be remiss if I didn't mention working with the school district staff, Tony Vanderberg, Stuart Kessler, and Jen Sheely, along with their board member, John Wallen, have really, with a group of city staff and our counselor, John Winland, it has been a pleasure. It's been some work, but and we do really look forward to the continuing work on the construction and our relationship with the district.
That's great, yeah. Thank you very much, and thank you, Councilor Winland, for your supporting us in this.
So it'll be built by Christmas? Is that right? Is that
2024.
Oh, that's right.
Okay, thank you, Ivan. Now on the, there was that edit we have on the consent agenda, the administrative procedures. It was that minor. Yeah, we figured that out, fixed up. Okay. So on the consent agenda, we have meeting minutes for January and resolution 2207. Is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
Move to adopt the consent agenda.
Thank you, Councilor Rath.
Second.
Councilor Burdick. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The motion passes 7-0. Any information from councilors? Ms. Bennett?
Well, council already knows this, but I feel like I should say it in public. I think you all know that our police chief, Dale Jorgensen, has announced his plans to retire this summer. He's agreed to stay on until we've selected a new chief, which I'm incredibly grateful for. Yes, speaking. Yeah, here he comes, the man himself.
He doesn't know what he's walking into.
I'm sure as the months get closer, I'll be able to think of something nasty to say about Dale, but for now I can't. I really can't say enough about what a great chief he is and how perfect he is for the community of Lake Oswego. I think of him as progressive and innovative. I think of him as a person with a big heart. I think of him as collaborative. And in the last 3 years, we've gotten to work together on the community dialogue. We got to work together on what I call the summer of 2020, which was not the summer of love. I got to watch him create the behavioral health program, and I'm really astonished by how creative he is with the use of non-sworn folks. He's also a great communicator. He treats us all like a partner. His first answer is yes, and so I think we're all going to miss him an awful lot. And as I say, I'll work on being a little bit snarkier as we get closer to his retirement date. But for now, I just am kind of pissed at him.
But did you say he's going to stay until his replacement is named?
Yeah.
So if we name his replacement in
2027? I threatened at his staff
work?
meeting today, it was going to take me 18 months to conduct a search. We will be conducting...
Again, I think we need to consider the unintended consequences and think creatively about a solution here.
Yeah, there we go. We will be conducting a search for his replacement. We'll be using a recruitment firm to help us with that. First step is always developing a profile, and I'll be reaching out to lots of folks about making sure we get the profile right. And there'll be more updates on that to come. That's really all I have.
Okay. Thank you very much. This is we're gonna conclude the broadcast portion, now move into an executive session. But before we do so, I'll ask Attorney Luce to read the legal parameters for us, please.
Thank you, Mayor. The Lake Oswego City Council will now meet under the authority of ORS 192.6602D to conduct deliberations with persons designated to carry on labor negotiations, and F, consider records that are exempt by public law from public inspection. No decision will be made by the council in executive session. Any decisions made will be done in an open meeting. The public is not free to attend the executive session, nor is the media, because this is for labor negotiations. And
okay,
turn back to you.
Thank you. Well, we are going to we're going to hold a meeting here at the dais, and yes, so we will now go into executive session. But we'll just take a short recess to wrap up the cameras and all that stuff. So.
Don't anybody leave, right?